Good morning, everyone. If you could please take your seats, we will begin day 2 of our Watershed Summit in just a moment. Please take your seats. Welcome and thank you all for joining us for day 2 of our Before the Fire Protecting the Water Towers of the West Watershed Summit. We hope you all enjoyed our program yesterday, and from the feedback I've heard so far, it sounds like you did. So thank you for being here for day 2. Before we introduce our first speaker of the morning, I would like to take another opportunity to thank our incredible sponsors. We would not be able to do this event without the generosity of these folks. Our title sponsor is Swire Coca-Cola. Let's give them a big round of applause. The venue was sponsored by Montrose Forest Products. Thank you to the Montrose Forest Products team. Last night's cocktail mixer was sponsored by Community Hospital. Thank you, Community Hospital. Yesterday's panel was sponsored by Business for Water Stewardship. Thank you, Molly Mugglestone and the team from Business for Water. So I've mentioned this a couple times now, but at the end of today, because we all know that you have traveling to get to this afternoon, we have boxed lunches prepared for you. There's sandwiches, water bottle, chips, and a cookie, I think, in there. And we have I think we have some hummus ones for you non-meat eaters out there in the universe. Those box lunches are sponsored by the Colorado Forest Water Alliance and Aurora Water. So let's thank them for their generosity. The break and refreshment sponsors were Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, Tri-State Generation and Transmission, and the Colorado Water Center at Colorado State University. Thank you for sponsoring our refreshments. General sponsor was St. Mary's Hospital and Medical Center. And then the program was sponsored by Executive Security International, Mark and Kathy Fackler, and Denver Water. Thank you all for your support. First speaker of the morning has worked as a consultant for the Colorado timber industry for more than 25 years. During this time, she was the timber coordinator for Colorado and Wyoming for Intermountain Forest Association, the regional Mountain States director for Healthy Forests, Healthy Communities, and co-owner of the Fishering Family Farm. Also during this time, she was the Club 20 Public Lands and Natural Resources Committee co-chair and has led that committee to be one of Club 20's most active. Nancy also serves on the Colorado Forest and Water Alliance and is engaged with RMRI and all kinds of forestry related groups across the West. She joins us this morning to provide a bit of a recap of everything we heard yesterday. Please welcome Nancy Fishering.
Thank you. I'm going to add to my bio really quickly, since I now also represent Uncompahgre Valley Water Users, which is an 88,000 acre irrigation project in Delta and Montrose counties. My feeling for getting involved with them is ag is not at the table often enough. So I also bring that to the table. I take my forestry background, combining with ag now. Yesterday was a hard day to recap because we had such excellent speakers. We learned so much. I think it's a good day well spent when I can take away from the end of the day. I learned 5 new things. I learned something new from every speaker. It was phenomenal. We really appreciated Chris French setting the national picture. When you can finally get your head around, I was talking to a water provider that said, we never used to talk about watersheds when we go to forest meetings. And now we have them getting their head around 53% of the national water supply comes from forests, 43% comes from national forests. That was a key point to kick off our day. He also informed us that the science says that treating 10 to 20% of the forest can take care of 80% of the problem sometime. Huge issue to know how important it is to focus. They also told us at a certain point, and I might not attribute all the talking points to the right person, but the other big takeaway was that you have to treat about 40% of a landscape if you're going to make a difference. And so that's where you keep hearing increased pace and scale. It's based on science. So I think that's a big takeaway. Frank helped set the stage for our region. That was very important, and he set it up as a unique moment in time. Matt joined him. They showed us together. They're in partnership in a way I've never seen. And as you heard, I've been doing this since the 90s. I have not seen that since the 90s. And it is just as tight as it can be. Dan Gibbs is another partner in that. That was another big takeaway. They all talked about the need for leveraging the money. We talk about it's a generational influx of money that we got from the federal bipartisan infrastructure law, but the catch is it's a drop in the bucket. They called it a down payment. We need to keep that in mind. We need partners. We see the big partnerships that we've learned from the Front Range. We have Aurora Water, Denver Water. We have so many water providers here. When you get to the Western Slope, we're rural. We're spread too thin. We do not have the capacity, but we want to be at the table. And I see so many of those people here in this room. And the partnerships going forward are going to be key. Collaboration is another takeaway from yesterday. We heard that all the way through. One of the barriers to collaboration is how much time it takes. We don't have time. So I like the fact that we framed it, Frank framed it. It's a crisis. You don't have time to start planning right now. We need to be planning for action. And we heard action, I think, across the board from people like Matt, Frank, and all the speakers. From every forest you heard, it's all about coordinating for the action. We heard we have to leverage the dollars. That down payment isn't enough. It's an expensive process. Some of it you're paying for the work on the ground. The rest of the time we rely on the industry to help pay for the work on the ground. So we need to leverage other dollars. We were very lucky to have Coca-Cola here to talk about how the big corporations are willing to invest in some of the ecosystem services they get from the other benefits that they get from treating the landscape from the wildfire crisis. So it is a unique moment in time. We also learned about the incredible impacts, heartrending, that we heard from the folks that have, I mean, when you hear from the Plumas and you hear 2 million acres every single year, 18, 19, 20, 21, it's a huge job for our agencies. So we know we need to be helping them. They can't do this on their own. And we learned that, and look at all the different interests that we've gotten at the table. One of the big takeaways for me wasn't just from hearing the speakers, it was from hearing the conversations in the hall. Now we need to do this. We have soil conservation districts, we had the wildfire councils, we had NGOs, we had county commissioners, we had water providers. It was a very dynamic feel here that there's things to be done, there's action that needs to be taken, but that we learned incredible amount of information and how much impact there was to the communities and how much it costs. And the money doesn't cost just fighting the fire. It still occurs until you've recovered from the fire. And then you've got the next steps. And that's where Matt told us about the nursery, developing more trees to replant. Reforestation is another piece of this whole pie. That's after the forest. Our focus is Western Slope. If we're lucky enough, we're ahead of some of these fires. We're not the Plumas. I love being ahead of the fires. And so that was why the focus for Club 20 was before the fires. What do we need to know? The other thing that was brought up by Jeff Marcellet, I was when he said the next generation collaboration, it really struck a bell to me, because some of us have been collaborating. I call Colorado collaborating on steroids. We've been collaborating nonstop since the 90s, but it's a next generation. It's bringing some of these new partners to the table. And so I hope we can stay engaged going forward. I like the conversation about WUI. it isn't just WUI. It was again Jeff that said, engaging with our water people and our hydro people gives you a different depth to these questions. The hydropowers are deep in the backcountry. They're equally important for hydropower water supply. So we need to be looking at WUI in a much broader way than I think many people did in the past. As a matter of fact, one person said, what is WUI? And I said, well, wildland urban interface. But we know the guys in Denver need the water from the western slope. It is incredibly complex, but I think our speakers brought that through loud and clear. I loved the example from when we were talking about, I think it was again Jeff, who was talking about his one very small 3,500 acres of a prescribed burn. It was done for an irrigation company in the El Dorado National Forest. And it did make a huge effect with a huge fire. And so that's the importance. That was a 100-year-old irrigation system. We've got the Uncompahgre up into the Upper Gunnison. That's a 100-year-old, 100-plus-year-old irrigation company. They don't have the amount of money it takes just to keep those things running, the ditches open and maintained. The extra money they need, they don't have a lot of money like Denver Water has. How many taps do they have? I don't see Christina Bury, but you start adding all the taps that they can spread their costs around. Aurora Water, we don't have that kind of population base to help us fund this amount of work that we need to be preemptive to some of the possible fires that we're going to see. I really liked TNC that was here, Nancy Smith talking about the alignment. We are seeing an alignment with our conservation community, and they are starting to recognize that we are aligned and we do need to work together. I think that was really key. She brought up the importance of snowpack. Snowpack is key on the western slope, as we know, because of the drought. She talked about, and our folks over here on Colorado River District talk about, we're the hotspot. We're already seeing the drought. We're in it now. And we know how important snow is, but she brought that up, and I think she was the first speaker of the day to talk about the snowpack and how important it is. And with using research, can we retain it longer? It's important to be focused also on snowpack, because what we've seen is the drier soils is causing real issues in rural areas, and it's affecting the runoff. Somebody gave us the example of 80% snowpack, and yet it only had 30% of the normal runoff. It's going into the soils. And so that's going to be a problem for drier conditions for our water users, our water providers, and demand management. Our issues get more and more complicated. So another person that's at the table and has been today, with the assistance of Dan Gibbs in the Department of Natural Resources, Colorado Water Conservation Board. We're all kind of in it together, trying to put resources towards all of this, but it's going to take every bit of it and a lot of coordination. And I don't care who the speakers were. They talked about how big their coalitions are. Paula Strepp had lists of them on her Middle Colorado Conservation District. And that's what we're all looking at, but we don't want to be sitting in meetings. That's the downside. And I look at people like Jamie on the Wildfire Council. There's so much work for them to do. They do not want to be in a meeting. They want to be out on the ground doing the work. Keeping that in mind, let's not create bureaucracies. Let's move and get action done for the ground. The other information we learned in the afternoon, we had Dan Dallas talking about everything we thought we knew about fires. They're teaching us a brand new dynamic. That is incredibly important. I don't even know how they keep up with what are they going to do with these fires. So that's why getting ahead of it whenever we can is important. And we need to identify our most essential values at risk. And many of our communities have not done that. They haven't identified the 10, 20% that they need to focus their resources on that can help prevent the fires just devastating certain towns or different irrigation systems or different water supplies. We also had a great presentation from, I liked hearing from Carl Morgenstern from Eugene Water and Power and Electricity, Because in Colorado, I've been here long enough where we said, well, we only need to focus on the dry forest, lower elevation, 40-year return intervals on fire. And here he's from a wet forest, had 193,000 acre fire in 3 days. And no one is really immune from what might happen in your community. And I hope that's a takeaway for a lot of people. And then the other important things in Colorado, and again, I think we've been a leader on a lot of collaborative efforts, is that we did sign a very aggressive shared stewardship agreement, a collaborative effort with the U.S. Forest Service, thanks to the state government, DNR. And I think both Dan and Matt said we need to have and use all the tools in the toolbox. That's the other thing. We can't just rely just on prescribed fire. We can't just do only timber management for commercial. We're doing every kind of management on the ground that you can imagine. And some of it's more expensive than others, but we need to be working together on all of that. And I think Dan made that comment. He's talked from the day he took over DNR about doing community wildfire protection plans. They call it CWP squared, add in watersheds. Again, that's kind of a new continuum for the U.S. Forest Service. You look at historic forest plans, you're not going to see a lot of focus on watersheds. You are hydrology, you've got hydrologists, you've got all the people looking at, is this river healthy? Is this fen in good shape? What it hasn't connected it to is the uses of the water. And so that's why the people in this room are important. We're going to be the ones that are going to have to say, did you know our intake is right there? Did you know this is a wooden flume and what would happen if we had a fire here? Dan knows what he's had to do in past fires to avoid the most at-risk areas, but I talked to Colorado Springs Utilities. They were in the back room writing down all the critical areas during the Waldo fire. Wasn't ahead of the time. We need to be ahead of the time. And that's on our backs. And that's how we partner with the U.S. Forest Service. One of my last favorite one was Andrew Johnson, because I felt like, okay, you're from Wyoming and you sound more rural than a lot of them do, although every single national forest tends to be rural areas. But he gave us some really good focused information on how they did specific NEPA documents just to work in a watershed protection mode for the city of Sheridan, Wyoming. Very useful information. I could tell you more gems from every single person because we learned stuff all day long yesterday, but I'm going to use some of Matt McComb's final words. He goes, engage, engage, engage. And that really is what we need to be doing. That's why Club 20 wanted to host this summit. We will see the next steps and we'll talk about it at the end. Anybody that wants to join, you're welcome to join us. But we do town meetings. If we need to drill down into one area, we'll host a town meeting over lunch. We do very similar activities to the Colorado River District. They do water for lunch. They have a news feed. And I think those are the tools that help all of us learn as we're all learning together. So those were my favorite takeaways. And I had pages and pages I could have picked up. But you can't recap that much information that we got in a very full day with experts from across the US. The key of hearing from California, Wyoming, Nevada, we're going to hear from Arizona. It's very important to be learning from everyone else as we're picking up and we're running with it. We're not going to start planning. So thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed it. I thank all of our sponsors again. We needed Coca-Cola, corporates at the table. We need to engage them because it's going to take some of their contributions. And it's easier, I think, for them to do it on the Front Range. There's a very large presence. There's people at those organizations that are always there that can teach you. On the Western Slope, we're going to have to work a little harder to engage for the corporate money. And so I really appreciated that they thought it was important enough to sponsor this conference because we need every one of those sponsors to be engaged in one way or another. So I thank them. I thank you guys because it's this diversity that we see in this room, the different points of view that we learn from each other, can take it and run with it, give the Matt McCombs and give the Dan Gibbs, Frank and his people, give them the social license. If you hear people starting to whine about cutting another tree, everybody needs to be, hey, it is important in the wildlife is benefiting, the water is benefiting, everything benefits. It's tied together, and don't look at it as we're just cutting trees. There are so many multiple benefits from it. So thank you all. Thank you again from our sponsors. And that's as good as I can do for 8 hours of yesterday. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Hello, Alyssa. Pleasure to see you over there. Well, we are about 13 minutes early. We do have Senator Bennett joining us virtually by Zoom here at 9 a.m. to talk about federal funding opportunities that were in the infrastructure package that passed Congress, and some other federal funding opportunities. And that'll be followed up by a conversation on corporate and private funding opportunities. So we will be in a touch of a holding pattern for about 10 minutes.
The story of the Wildfire project
Red speech. But I should have them sit, actually. The group. It's 2 minutes out. Yeah? I mean, if he's like 2-3 minutes out, then we can have everybody sit down. If everybody could please make your way back into the ballroom for our next presentation. Please take your seats. All right. Chris Treese, can you rally the troops out in the hall? Again, thank you for joining us this morning. As we have heard, one of the barriers to advancing watershed work is having the financial resources needed to complete landscape scale projects. Our next two presenters are joining us to tell us about new federal funding opportunities and existing private funds. Senator Michael Bennett has represented Colorado in the United States Senate since 2009. Widely recognized as a pragmatic and independent thinker, he is driven by a deep-seated obligation to create more opportunity for the next generation. Michael has built a reputation of taking on Washington dysfunction and working with Republicans and Democrats to address our nation's greatest challenges. Senator Bennett has been an advocate for increased federal funding for forest management and watershed restoration, having supported the federal infrastructure legislation of 2022. So joining us by Zoom, please help me welcome United States Senator Michael Bennett.
Thank you, Christian. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I've learned to say that over the last 2 years. So thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me to share a few words. And for Club 20's tremendously close partnership over the years. When I think about our work together, Club 20 has consistently put forest health and water near the top of the agenda. You guys anticipated Western water and forestry challenges years ago, and sadly, virtually everything you predicted has come to pass. Intense drought that's left Colorado farmers and ranchers with a lot less water, 3 of the largest wildfires in our state's history, and the devastating Marshall Fire, devastating Marshall Fire, literally the day before New Year's this year. All those fires in the last 2 years, mudslides that blockaded I-70 for weeks and made national news. Lake Powell now at its lowest level since the reservoir was filled 60 years ago. We're living through a crisis for Western water, which is why last fall I invited Senator Romney to float the Colorado River with me. We did it mostly in Moab, so we could see the water levels firsthand and think about how to deal with these issues in a bipartisan way. Mitt Romney didn't need any persuasion, but back in Washington, I've been making the case for years that in Colorado, watersheds and forests are more important to our economy than the Lincoln Tunnel is to New York City. And after years of what felt like banging my head against the wall, I can actually finally report some progress. We secured $5.5 billion for our forests in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That represents a massive increase in the money available for forestry, including $3.4 billion to reduce wildfire risk with efforts like thinning and harvesting, creating fuel breaks and improving detection and monitoring. We passed my bill to authorize the Joint Chiefs program and double its funding. That program is critical to supporting wildfire mitigation and forest health projects that cross both public and private lands. We secured $8 billion for Western water, as Christian was mentioning, including $300 million for emergency watershed protection after the Grizzly Street fire. That funding was critical to stabilize the water intake systems in Glenwood Springs, and there's still more that we need to do all across the state. We secured $50 million to implement the drought contingency plan for the upper basin of the Colorado, and that's just the infrastructure bill. We also just passed a budget that invests in many of the projects people in this room have talked about over the years, including over $6 million to improve municipal water systems in Dove Creek, Craig, Minturn, Rico, and Walden. The latest budget has over $120 million to support 64 projects just like that across Colorado, many of them on the western slope. I can talk about those in a minute, but when you add it all up, I'm not sure there's been a time, at least in my lifetime, that Congress has actually done more to put resources on the ground for Western water and Western forests. And of course, that doesn't mean our work is finished. We've still got communities all across the western slope working incredibly hard to support forest health and watershed restoration with severely limited budgets. They're doing the work that the federal government in many cases is supposed to have done. And all they want is a little bit of support from Washington, not federal mandates, but real collaboration. And that's why I wrote the Outdoor Restoration Partnership Act, a bill with broad support from Club 20 members like Merritt Linke that invest $60 billion to support local communities to protect our forests and watersheds. I know $60 billion is a lot of money, but that's what we've been spending fighting fires every 5 years in this country. And there's nothing fiscally conservative about waiting for the fires and spending money at $50,000 an acre instead of doing it at $1,400 an acre and creating a bunch of jobs in the Rocky Mountain West at the same time. And so we got a lot of work ahead, but I can tell you it's nice for once to be able to report some actual progress from Washington on the issues that we've talked about for years. While I have you, I just wanted to mention postal reform, which is something that I've heard from a lot of Club 20 members over the years. As you know, the finances of the post office were a total mess, and it would threaten essential American services critical to rural communities, especially. And I would say these are essential to our rural communities. This bill that we just passed and went to the president's desk will put the Postal Service on a much stronger footing for years to come, and hopefully is going to result in more investments in service on the west slope of Colorado. Finally, the last thing I want to mention before I quit is we secured $65 billion for high-speed broadband in the infrastructure law. That's the most significant investment in American history. And the bill was based on the Bridge Act, which I wrote in Colorado with Club 20 and rural co-ops like DMEA. And this, what we said, and just to remind you of the bill, was we had enough, subsidizing the largest telecom companies in the world and then watching them not build out broadband to rural areas in this country. And instead, we needed to have states and local communities be able to do that. So the bill essentially says that in the 21st century, we should insist on the same high-speed broadband in every rural community that's available in any city on the coast. And instead, we should be investing in rural co-ops like DMEA. So for once, there's some good news in DC. So let me just end with this observation. After years of investing everywhere except in America, we're finally beginning to rebuild our country. We're investing in our future. We're finally making Western water and forests a national priority. And you can draw a straight line from virtually every achievement I've described today and Club 20's advocacy and leadership over the years. So more than anything else this morning, I just want to say thank you. We've got a lot of work ahead, and I know we don't agree on everything, but I also know the only way we ever make progress as a country is through the kind of honest conversations that we've had over the years. So thanks again for having me, and I'll turn it back over to Christina. Happy to take anybody's questions or criticisms.
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate you joining us this morning. Are there questions for Senator Bennett related to the topic we're here today for, which is forest and watershed health? Who's running the microphone this morning? Ray Beck, I think I saw you volunteer. Thank you, sir, for your volunteerism. See how that's done?
Okay, did I see a hand up here? All right, let's start.
And again, as a reminder, please introduce yourself so that our speakers know who and where you're from.
Senator Bennett, Steve Henson, CEO with Nyman Enterprises here in Colorado. We have a mill in Montrose. First thing I'd like to do is thank you for your commitment and your leadership to get the funding that is so critical and crucial to the watersheds. And the question I have is, having met personally with a regional forester here with the Forest Service yesterday and the state forester in Colorado, there appears to be a real strong partnership and dedication by two very strong individuals to be active and to take your agenda forward, and we as partners want to support them. The question is, I hear from the Chief of the Forest Service, the Assistant Chief, that this is a good down payment, and this is a great start. And I believe sincerely that the Chief of the Forest Service wants to create fire resilient forest, and he wants to do the right thing. The issue is, after so long, what can we look like for sustainability once the Forest Service ramps up, once the partners come together?
Yeah.
Once we really lean into this, Are you going to be able to get your colleagues and others to sustain this effort so we truly can make a difference 3, 5, 10, 15
Right.
years out? Thank you.
Right. I think
Thank you
that's
very
such a great point. And I do think that bill that I mentioned earlier, the Outdoor Restoration Partnership Act, which basically was written on the west slope of Colorado, is the answer to that. I mean, that bill, as I said, calls for $60 billion of spending over 10 years to deal with this. The $5 billion we have, I agree with that. I think I would agree with the assessment of the chief that it's a good down payment. And I'm just going to have to go back and find some vehicle to get this bill passed. There was in the reconciliation bill that did not pass, there was $27 billion to fund the Outdoor Restoration Act, which would have carried us, far into the future. It wasn't the full 60 billion, but it was half of that. That would have been the most significant investment in our forests in the country's history. I also had an additional 27 billion for conservation, for soil health. That would have been the biggest investment that we had made since the Dust Bowl. And both of those are important priorities for me, and we're going to continue to push. You asked, how do we convince my colleagues? This has been a process of taking back what the effects are in real time to our economy, to our way of life, of the drought that we're experiencing. And I'm sorry to say this, but matters are only going to get worse in that respect. And Club 20 knows that. We have to prepare for the future. And as Mitt Romney said when he and I went together on the raft, he said, I don't want Washington telling us what to do, but Washington should be helping fund some of the stuff that we have to do to make this transition. And part of that is our forests. And that's work we're going to be advocating for over many years to come. This was the first year when we had all that smoke last year in Colorado from California. It actually finally this year managed to make it to the East Coast. And that's the reason why I think we've been able to make the progress that we've been able to make this year.
Thank you, Senator.
But I guess the last point is, your point is so important for businesses like yours and for other folks around the country. The predictability that's required is really, really important. That's why we have to do this over the long haul, not just the short term.
Thank you, Senator. Is there another question for Senator Bennett? Cindy Dozier in the back of the room has a question, and Ray, if you'll get the microphone over to
I want to just show Ray that I have today. I'm representing today because I have my Moffat County water bottle.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. It's the best thing anybody ever gave me.
Good morning, Senator. Thank you so much for being with us. Cindy Dozier with Club 20, Colorado Forest Water Alliance, and Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. Blah, blah. How do you see protection of water being incorporated into forestry legislation and land management decisions? This whole conference that we've been here discussing for the last, 48 hours or so, has been with regards to connecting our forests and our waters from the headwaters to the use. And how do we incorporate that into pending legislation and utilizing this funding in a really effective manner?
I mean, let me just say, I completely agree though. If this water, if at the heart of all this, if water weren't at the heart of all this, there'd be that we wouldn't be able to make the arguments that we're making. But the argument that I'm making is these forests, as I said, are infrastructure that's important as any infrastructure in America. And I literally believe that every single thing that's downstream from this water, which is every farm and ranch in Colorado, it's every business in Colorado, it's our large cities and the smallest communities. We're all downstream from that water, and therefore we're all downstream from those forests. And if those forests are unhealthy, and if those forests burn and clog up or destroy our watersheds, which could happen, it's going to transform Colorado for generations. And that's why when I say it's more important than Lincoln Tunnel, when I tell Schumer that, I mean it, because you can at least get into Manhattan on the GW Bridge if the Lincoln Tunnel is closed. We don't have that with respect to our forests. And it's also not something that's just about mountaintops either. You know, I've stood in places like Durango and looked over the town with people that are trying to plan how to thin the forest around the community, and had conversations with them where we've said, you know, we need to think about this. There's no more important infrastructure we have, because it's protecting, in this case, the chance of there being catastrophic loss of property or loss of life. And that's why we need to do our work. So all this stuff is connected. And I will say, in terms of water, if you look at, there's going to be $688 million in water infrastructure funds that are coming to Colorado State revolving fund, including clean drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater projects. There's going to be overall, you know, for the West, about $8 billion in Western water resiliency, including a very substantial amount for tribal water projects, to create clean drinking water and sanitation projects. And at the same time, and that was, by the way, a bill that I wrote with Senator Hickenlooper and Senator Heinrich from New Mexico. Then we've got forestry and fire mitigation. So we've got, as I mentioned, $300 million for emergency watershed protection and $225 million to carry out burn area rehabilitation on National Forest Service land. And that, none of that is enough, but it's certainly better than we were just a couple of years ago. And as I mentioned, you know, there was a mention made of the good collaboration between the state forestry program and the federal folks. We need everybody working together. Fire doesn't know any political boundaries or any political jurisdictions, and that's why Senator Hoeven, who's a Republican from North Dakota, and I put in that bill on joint chiefs, because that's a way of getting the agencies to actually work in a collaborative way. We've got to work. We got to do this at the landscape level. And in the end, none of it matters if we're not protecting our water. That's the whole point of what we're trying to do.
Thank you. And I do want to just say thank you also for your earlier remark of working with Club 20 on these matters. We have a room full of subject matter experts here today, and we look forward to working with you.
Well, and if stuff, I think you guys know this, but if stuff is as decisions start to get made and things start to get implemented and things begin, you know, if there are things that aren't making sense, let me know, please.
Rachel Richards, Picken County and Aspen. Thank you, Senator Bennett, for your time with us today. My question is, how is the coalition building going with other people who have a great interest in this, such as the California senators, Arizona senators, all the utilities that buy the energy from Lake Powell? It would seem that if we can really get Imperial Valley behind us to save our forest, we might have a little more clout both in the House and the Senate. Thank you.
Rachel, it's just beginning. When I mentioned, I'm not sure I mentioned that when I went to Utah, I took 15 people from Colorado, many of them water people, and the same from Utah. A lot of people knew each other already, and those relationships are going to be really important as we get into this coalition building and conversation. And just the other day, Hickenlooper and I had a conversation with Mark Kelly, who's from Arizona, and John has been trying to put together the Western senators, Republicans and Democrats, to come together for our first meeting on water. And obviously there are tensions that exist and there are interests that exist between the upper basin and the lower basin, and everybody's rightly so, everybody's keeping their eye on their interests and their state's interests and the interests of their basin. But I think we are realizing that we are on the cusp of some really seismic changes and interruptions on the Colorado River, and it's going to require us to have, I think, a regional approach in the West that leads Washington rather than waiting for Washington to lead us, which I think would be a big mistake. Because if we do that, we won't end up solving the problem, and we will end up, driving the West into the ditch. So I would say early days, and any help you can give us to push people in the direction of a collaborative spirit on this stuff, we would appreciate very much. I don't just mean you, Rachel, I mean you, Club 20.
And Senator, we are out of time, but I just want to thank you again for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your partnership and collaboration and look forward to seeing you in person at some point soon.
I can't wait to see you guys in person. I'm so sorry I'm not there today, and have a wonderful rest of the meeting and a great weekend.
And
Talk to you
don't forget to pay your membership dues, Senator. We're looking forward to it.
I will get on that this afternoon. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Sorry about
Senator.
that. Let me tell you something. I hope it doesn't take me 2.5 hours to get my dues paid, which is what it took me with these DirecTV guys earlier this week to get my stuff turned on because my credit card got stolen. But that's a whole.
We'll make sure there's no lap in your membership, Senator.
All right, good. Thank you. Talk to you. See
Thank
ya.
you.
Bye.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
So joining Senator Bennett to talk about funding opportunities is Sarah Hoversten, the Director of Business for Water Stewardship, which is a network of businesses focused on securing water for business, nature, and communities. Sarah cultivates, maintains, and expands partnerships that help advocate or advance impact and impact the parent organization of Bonneville Environmental Fund, whose mission is to envision a thriving world where everyone has access to clean water and renewable energy. So Sarah is joining us here by Zoom today. So let's give Sarah a warm welcome.
Great. Thanks, Christian. I just want to make sure, because I can only see from here. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes, they look perfect.
Awesome. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I thank you for having me. It's a tough act to following Senator Bennett, but a little bit of a switch here to a basement in Portland, Oregon. But I'm really pleased to be here today. So I'm Sarah Hoversten. I'm the Director of Business for Water Stewardship Program at Bonneville Environmental Foundation. And BEF has worked for decades at the intersection of watershed restoration and renewable energy. And our BWS program, as we call it, represents really all the work that we do around what we would call environmental water stewardship. And I think if you all were here yesterday to hear John Radke with Coca-Cola and Mike Bernier with Swire Coca-Cola, they teed this all up very nicely, as we are one of the activation partners that I would say that help bring the stewardship programs and objectives and goals to life with the corporate partners on the project side. So BEF's work in this area was initiated about 15 years ago, really trying to create a market or a program through which companies could invest in projects and products that would deliver water stewardship outcomes. And it was built on this foundation of that concept of balancing the water footprint. So how do we work with companies to understand their water use and restore to nature what they were consuming is a way to balance that concept. And over the years, though, our work has really evolved significantly, especially over the past decade, and it really reflects the arc and the status of the corporate environmental watershed stewardship movement. Today, we provide really deep expertise across a lot of different geographies across the US and North America, and increasingly internationally. We provide strategic vision for these water stewardship programs, goals, and the way they get implemented from the project side. We provide connections to on-the-ground partners and pathways to support innovative solutions for our complex water challenges. And the simplest way to think about it, we're really the middle person who's acting, translating between the NGO or agency partners on the ground and the corporate partners, and then ultimately funding the project partners on the ground. Over the years, we have helped to facilitate funding for nearly 150 water stewardship projects across 26 US states. And like I said, increasingly internationally, we have large partnerships in both Canada and Mexico, and then growing also in Europe. Those projects restored around 30 billion gallons of fresh water to ecosystems in need. And that's been through partnerships with about 60 corporate partners or so, and funneling millions of dollars to these projects. So with water stress growing very visibly across the US and the world, corporations are increasingly making this connection between the water stress and their operational, or even as John mentioned yesterday, their reputational risk. And increasingly, they're developing and participating in water stewardship actions, investments, or strategies that occur outside of their direct operational footprint, or as we would refer to it, outside of the fence line. And they're making these public commitments with measurable goals and objectives. I'm providing here just a few examples to show you what these companies are committing to very much in the public sphere. And you did hear directly from really the first mover in this space and the continuous beacon, I think, in this movement, Coca-Cola today. I think this is their updated 2030, part of their updated 2030 water stewardship goal and strategy. And with these strategies and these public commitments, we've led to increased budgets and greater opportunities to support water projects across the country. Now, what we originally thought would be this very transactional market of balancing the water footprint, this drop for drop consideration, is we fund a project, it delivers X volume, and they purchase the volume to balance it, very much like the carbon offsets market or the renewable energy certificates market. Hasn't really gone that way, and kind of like water itself, it's paved its own course we have here. We have realized, actually we knew, but what has come to light more and more, that water is just so local and the solutions are so place dependent that the movement has really had to adapt to expand its thinking on how we would be able to fund these projects and what it means for corporate claims and what corporations are putting out there. And John, sorry, hearkening John a lot. I wonder if he's in the room today. But he mentioned this yesterday too, of moving away from this concept of chasing the drops, of trying to find where we can get the highest volume projects at the lowest cost, to really expanding the thought of the kind of impact that we're looking to drive with these projects and the kind of long-term nature of partnerships that is required in these spaces. So today we are seeing, and we are actually trying to drive very much this transition away from these transactional projects being funded to more transformational actions that are really helping to catalyze these large scale water impacts we need. So when the companies come to us, or we partner with these organizations, what they're looking at now as far as drivers for projects that they would be interested in funding are those that support this transformative change, and they catalyze progress with our shared water challenges. Each company has a different interest area given their operational footprint, or where their stakeholders are, or where their large customer base is. But there's definitely a lot of overlap in some of those areas, like the Colorado River Basin that serves so many of from the lower basin states and into California. They want to see projects that really offer a clear pathway to be able to fund them, that the projects get implemented, they deliver reportable long-term water benefits and climate resilience. We want to see projects now more that drive this breadth of co-benefits, serving not only the environmental impact side, but also the social and economic needs of the communities. They want to be able to leverage their corporate funding with public and other private sources to make that funding go further and make these projects move into implementation. And we want to demonstrate scalable, collective, and innovative funding models to address identified priorities spaces. So, private funding that is available isn't going to solve the problem. We started having is coming from the public space, and it's only a drop in the bucket is needed. but and the scale of private funding in this space from corporations is definitely a lot smaller than the public space. But it does prove to be very, very flexible, and it's a crucial leverage for other funding sources, projects like this public funding that Senator Bennett was just speaking to. And I think it's also a really, big deal, actually, just to say it very plainly, as was highlighted with the Windy Gap project that was mentioned yesterday. To have these really recognizable brands that are understanding and supporting these projects has benefits, I think, far beyond just the funding amount themselves or itself. So I did want to highlight very, very briefly a couple projects that we have funded, more of these kind of what we would say is collective action, where we have a number of corporate partners that are funding or contributing funding to these projects, just to give you a sense of what we're seeing the partners invest in and why. And we have a variety of project types that we fund, from these kind of leasing or flow transaction projects, which were really a foundation of the program, again, because they have that quantifiable volume associated with them that's easy to identify and then for companies to claim off of. But we also fund a lot of nature-based solutions in projects, and increasingly more projects with tribal nations and projects, WASH projects, that are those water access, sanitation, and health projects. So the first one to speak to very briefly is close to home for you all. It's the 15-mile reach restoration project with the Colorado Water Trust. This project was securing water to deliver to the Grand Valley Power Plant to produce hydropower. Once that water has been cycled through, then it is released back to the 15-mile reach, a critical stretch of the Colorado River during crucial times to support endangered fish species. We've worked multiple years and across multiple projects with the Colorado Water Trust. A lot of our partners have supported. And this project in particular, we have funded multiple rounds of the years of, and as you can see, it's gotten support from groups like Coca-Cola and Intel, to Major League Baseball and the Colorado Rockies, and a few other of our partners here. This project is very attractive as it has those long-term flow benefits. There's a collaborative nature of it, of the organizations and entities that are working on the project. And then there's additional co-benefits like expanding carbon-free hydroelectric power production. This next project is the Colorado River Indian System Conservation Project. This is really a marquee project in our space, something everyone is very, very proud of, and a real gold star, I think, in the movement. Driven by that drought contingency plan that Senator Bennett mentioned, this project compensates the CRIT, the Colorado River Indian Tribes, for conserving up to 150,000 acre feet of its Colorado River water for a multi-year period to really achieve decade scale supply benefits for the Colorado River, Lake Mead, and the lower basin states. This was in partnership with the state, with the Arizona Department of Water Resources, with Bureau of Reclamation, and then obviously the tribal nation. This project not only provides water resilience for the lower basin states, it also helps to monetize the water rights that we know tribal nations have been hard fought and not always having the full benefit of those. It supports the long-term priorities of the CRIT to even modernize their irrigation on reservations and conserve additional water. And with 15 private corporate funders that it will bring to the table, adding to the large amount of public funding for this project, it's really one of the largest multi-sector collaborative efforts that we've ever achieved in this space. And even greater is this partnership and the funding through this way was able to launch further project opportunities with the CRIT. We are looking at funding with many partners that are up on the screen right now, to on-reservation projects that are irrigation modernization and efficiency projects to continue to reduce the pull off the river and support the objectives of the tribal nations. And the last project, just for a quick highlight, which might be a little bit closer to home today, given that it's a forest and watershed health project. in the nature-based solution category for us, which, like we said, is increasingly, as we think about transformational projects, these are the types of projects that our corporate partners and us are seeking more and more. This is in Tahoe National Forest. Project treats and protects 48,000 acres of forest in critical water source areas. This increases the downstream water supply and mitigating the risk of catastrophic fire, and the environmental impacts and social impacts associated with that has been a real driver from partners in this work. And this project in particular, in partnership with Blue Forest, applies an innovative financing strategy to try to scale impact further and further beyond just the source waters in California. We are also funding forest resilience projects on behalf of corporate partners in New Mexico and in South Carolina and in other places as well. And so just to kind of wrap up in the thoughts around this is we're seeing more and more companies come to this space, this environmental water stewardship space, and have a desire to fund these bigger, what we could argue is more impactful projects, and bringing this flexible funding to the table. You know, the main issue that we're facing and continue to face is that what we'd say is the project supply doesn't always meet and match with the project demand. Corporate funding has a specific timeline and objectives and drivers, and we haven't found that there's really a pipeline yet of investment ready projects that can align with those quick timelines and various objectives that corporate partners have. So we're hoping to kind of see a shift in that space. You know, how can we support organizations to help bring projects that are investment ready to their partners, maybe speed up the timelines where we can in those, and are you really, you know, helping to shift and push on the demand side too, on the corporate side of trying to build a little bit more patience into the funding and consider long-term partnerships and the impact of funding that is going to help develop projects or implement a longer term project timeline that then is one that is absolutely shovel ready and benefits start accruing tomorrow when they invest in it. So with that, you know, we're very excited about what we're seeing in the industry and looking forward to leveraging more and more corporate funding in this space, and hopefully can match up with a number of you in the room who are bringing some of these innovative project opportunities to this area and see where we can align on continuing to move this movement forward.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I actually have a question for you. Are you seeing any of these partners that you're currently working with utilizing corporate funds to leverage federal funds for these projects?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of chicken or egg, right? Because a number of these projects that move forward that have federal grants have private funding match requirements or some kind of leverage requirements. This could be a really good spot for the corporate funding space to be able to provide those grant matches. And then in areas where it is of interest to maybe unlock some funding sources, we all are seeing a number of our partners who are more willing to sign letters of support or you know, leverage their brand and their voice a little bit more to bring projects forward or get kind of projects moving off the ground on it. So, and yes, and I will say too that because the corporate funding individually isn't always large enough to move a project forward, they're going to be coming in at the top to kind of to close any funding gaps that may exist with projects.
Excellent, thank you. Are there questions in the room for Sarah? We have one here. Again, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Sarah. My name is Jamie Gomez. I'm the Executive Director with the West Region Wildfire Council. We're a local nonprofit working on wildfire issues and as it relates to water as well. And I guess maybe it's two questions here. One, just really real quick, when you're talking about there's kind of a misalignment maybe between say, on the ground project partners and their ability to do this work effectively in terms of the timeline and the timelines that some of the corporate partners that you're talking about want to see? They want to see things happen quicker. How quick is quick? What kind of timelines, say, as Target or whomever else is up there on that on your slide? What kind of timelines are they wanting to see?
Okay, that was question 1. Do you want question 2 also?
Sure. I guess related to that, with that Yuba 2 project with the Blue Forest, I guess, you know, when you're talking about some of these projects that are directly related to like in-stream flows and water infrastructure and those kinds of things, the connection with improvements to quantifiable volume seems fairly straightforward and measurable. But when you're talking about large scale upland forest management, the ability to quantify volumes on that seems a little trickier. And I'm just curious kind of what process you all are doing out there to actually demonstrate quantifiable volume increases.
Yeah, so great on both those questions. The timelines are dependent based on the company. A lot of times, and many of these companies do not have established programs with a history quite like John Radke has established year over year at Coca-Cola. But a lot of times the organizations are operating on annual budgets and annual needs. So let's say with a company, we get a call and we say, hey, we want to source projects in these 3. We've identified these as top priority regions given their water risk and our connection to the area. We'd like to find projects in this space and fund them by the end of the year. And so then at that point, you know, we're going out, we're calling the networks that we have. We know of a lot of the projects and partners that are happening, but, you know, still requires scoping, getting up to speed on what the projects are today, what the funding gaps are, what the benefits are and the opportunities. In some cases, the companies are looking to put money into the projects within like 6-month timeframe. And then the real kicker is that these volumetric benefits or even project implementation into benefits, they're looking for that to happen within 1 to 2 years of the funding. So when I say quick, sometimes it's like, hey, what projects are just about ready to be implemented and are shovel ready, and we could close the funding gap on, and then those projects are going to get implemented and the benefits are going to start accruing within 1 year to 18 months. So that's fast, as I understand, with a number of these projects, especially those that are still being kicked around or require still engineering or permitting or others to happen. So that alignment is challenging because it just narrows the field of project opportunities quicker or down more quickly, right? When it says, hey, we have this funding level, we have this location, we have this timeline, and we want to, see benefits happening right away. That is changing a little bit. A lot of the partners have implemented, 2020, 30 or out goals in it, where we're trying to help them all build these portfolios of projects that are going to be delivering benefits year over year for 10, 15-year time. And with that then is the ability to think about projects on more of the out year basis. And what we're hoping to push and what we're seeing with the industry move forward to is being a little bit more flexible in that timeline and that opportunity to say, hey, can we invest in some projects now that are going to take a little bit longer to be designed, finalized, and implemented because they're really impactful and we want them in the portfolio. What we would do then is take this kind of portfolio approach with a company that says, okay, we want to have a couple of these forest resilience projects in that maybe the benefits are harder to quantify or they're longer term, but they're very important. So can we put some chunks of money to those and then at the same time match them up with some of these leasing projects or these flow transaction or flow restoration projects that deliver some of the benefits in a nearer term while allowing for our investment in these other kinds of projects. So that's a long way to answer that. The timelines can be very quick on the corporate budget side and their need to find and fund a project. And we're also working with companies to try to elongate that a little bit as we move into funding projects in this space that is different than what started with in the industry. And then to the question about the quantifying of the benefits. John mentioned this also yesterday. There's this volumetric benefit accounting that has been established by the industry. Again, all of this is voluntary, right? These aren't regulatory in any way for this restoration. But that was established with a number of partners, including hydrologists and engineering partners, to be able to try to quantify the benefits of a variety of different projects. And there's a number of groups in the space, including a group called Volumetric, that does a lot of that work to look at the projects, all the details, and to say, hey, this is what we could see would be the volume benefit year over year of this project that could be claimable by an organization. Each one of them can kind of be, I think, looked at different at times, and part of that ends up coming down to what are the drivers and objectives of the companies. And as was mentioned yesterday as well, is we're moving a little bit away from only volumetric drivers. So how are we looking at the comprehensive nature of these projects and the co-benefits that aren't making it, what is the cost per volume restored is the only assessment that's being used with them. And so thinking about the value of the kinds of projects that you were speaking to may not need to go through the rigorous assessment or have a really high volume that is able to be quantified to be eligible for or interesting to these project funders as they kind of expand their mindset of their funding supporting watershed health and not just balancing their water footprint.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us this morning to talk about private funding opportunities. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate being here. And thank you for allowing me to be here virtually.
So next we have a concentration of expertise on our final panel discussion titled, and this was Rick Cable's title, friends. So landscape scale projects go big. That's right. Thank you, Rachel, for your support. During this discussion, we hope to hear about several successful project solutions to overcoming barriers and incentives to advance watershed work. Here to introduce our panelists and to moderate this panel is Chris Treese, retired manager of external affairs for the Colorado River District, Club 20 Water Committee co-chair, and enduring water geek. Please welcome Chris to the stage.
Thank you, Christian. As I make the introductions for both the panel and the panelists, may I invite the panelists to come up, join us in our fireside chat format. Please, they should be comfortable. Nobody in the audience falls asleep, however. This is our final panel, first and final panel for today. And it is the go big and go home. This is the lessons learned. This is the challenge to all of you to take the lessons from yesterday and what is going to be discussed today and implement these activities and implement them and think big. Look at landscape scales. I will provide a brief introduction to each of our panelists in the order in which they will speak. Panelists, I'll ask you to just simply hand the microphones back and forth. And then questions, there will be time for questions afterward. So make notes of your questions and we will get to you. Let's see, and that's pretty much everything for now. So we will start. Frank Bem, who you heard from yesterday. Frank is the regional forester for the Rocky Mountain region, where he leads the stewardship of 22 million acres of national forests and grasslands with partners and 48 affiliated tribes in Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Wyoming. He's worked on 7 national forests and 5 ranger districts in the Rocky Mountain and Southern regions, as well as the Southern Regional Office, as well as DC office. After Frank, Elvie Barton joins us from Phoenix. Elvie is the Forest Health Principal with the Salt River Project in Arizona. Salt River Project water is delivered to 2 million residents and irrigates 8.3 million acres of land in northern and eastern Arizona. And the watersheds that provide this critical water supply are in desperate need of restoration. SRP, Salt River Project, is working with the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Reclamation, the state of Arizona, to develop a 20-year program to remove small trees that create fuel, ladder fuel for wildfires, and to restore watershed health. She is also a member of the adjunct faculty at Northern Arizona University. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees from Arizona State. Christina Bury joins us from Denver Water. Christina is a friend we've heard from previously, not this program, but on previous Club 20 activities. Christina is the first ever watershed scientist hired at Denver Water, working to inventory, protect, and improve 2.5 million acre watershed in Denver Water's collection system on both Colorado's east and west slopes. She leads Denver Water's innovative watershed management and planning efforts, including forest health investments. Christina also manages the From Forest to Faucets Partnership, a $66 million agreement between Denver Water, the U.S. Forest Service, Colorado State Forest Service, and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, to improve the health of Colorado forests and Colorado's watersheds. Batting cleanup, Matt McCombs, also heard from yesterday, recently appointed Colorado State Forester. Matt's career has spanned both natural resource and forest management, beginning as an aide to Senators Ken Salazar and John Tester. Matt is also a veteran, having been deployed into Iraq in 2003 as a combat medic with the Colorado Army National Guard and serving as a medical service officer in the Montana Air National Guard, where he achieved the rank of captain before leaving that service in 2012. Matt takes the lead at the Colorado State Forest Service following his time as district ranger for the 1.3 million acre Gunnison Ranger District. So with those introductions, Frank, if you can lead off, and do you have or do I have the clicker? You would like.
Yeah. Super, thank you. Great, thank you, and great to be back with you again today. Just a couple of opening comments before I get into talking about the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. Pat Dorsey, one of our really fantastic partners with National Wild Turkey Federation, Director of Conservation Operations in Western Region. Pat, you in the room? She's not. Okay. Well, one reason I wanted to bring up Pat was if you guys stump me with really hard questions, I may phone a friend. But the other reason is they've got a table out there and a little flyer on RMRI that's going to pretty much capture all the points I'm going to talk about. So if there's something out there you can pick up if you're interested. So and the other piece I want to touch on real quick in reflection from Senator Bennett's comments, which are really good. The piece about water, it got me thinking about our Forest Service history and just a really quick snapshot of Forest Service history. So our forest reserves were created by Congress in 1891. The Forest Service itself was created through the Transfer Act in 1905, transferred the forest reserves from the Department of Interior into USDA and created the Forest Service. But 1897 is what's called the Organic Act. We still refer to that as the Organic Act. Congress passed it, and it declared basically the initial intent of the forest reserves. And I'm going to read you real quick what those are. Many of you may be familiar with this, but the intent of Congress creating these forest reserves was to improve and protect the forest within the reservation, securing favorable flows of water, favorable conditions of water flows, and to furnish a continuous supply of timber for the use and necessities of the citizens of the United States. Now, Congress has passed a few laws since then, and they don't, and some of them are conflicting. And so we've got a lot of laws that have been passed since then, giving us additional direction. But I just want to tie back to our original Organic Act, and the importance of water has always been there within our mission, even before we were created as the Forest Service. So with that, we'll get into the presentation. It went up there. Oh, there we go. Good. So this is just real quick summary of what the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative is about. You see, problem for all takes all to solve. That's sort of the bottom line. And kind of what I talked about yesterday, sort of my bottom line up front. It's a big problem. We got to all be together to solve it. I will say, you know, the RMRI, and I'll get into some of the history of it here in a minute, but it really is designed to bring all of us together. It's co-led, the initiative co-led by the Forest Service and the National Wild Turkey Federation. I'll speak to that a bit more. 40 plus major national, state, and private organizations have joined the effort. And it really is a pilot that was established several years ago. Now, I'll say, let me back up. Part of the reason it was created in Colorado was because of Colorado's really strong history and collaboration. You know, this has been happening for a long time in Colorado. Because of that, the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative was started to build upon that. So that's just a really quick summary. So about us here, there we go. So vision and mission. So the mission, again, increase the resilience of our forests, wildlife habitats, communities, recreation opportunities, and water resources of all lands across the Rockies. Broad statement. We'll talk a little bit more about some focused work here in a minute. But the four values that unite us, and you'll see this on an upcoming screen. Number one is water, 2, forests and wildlife, 3, communities, and 4, recreation. So kind of a broad scope, but water is really a key component of this. So I'll get into, there are 3 landscapes that we've landed within Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. Southwest Colorado, which is the Marquee Project, and you'll see a map here in a bit on that, as well as the Upper Arkansas and the Upper South Platte. So with that, and the other thing I'll mention here is those 40 organizations I mentioned, over 170 partners, again, guided by those 4 shared values: water, healthy forests and wildlife, robust recreation, resilient communities. Getting ready to say next, but I think that's me. All right, so here is the map of those 3 landscapes I mentioned. Again, southern Colorado, southwest Colorado around the San Juan National Forest. I'll speak mostly to that today as a description of kind of how we, the big we within partnership, are going big. But I'll also touch a little bit on the Upper Arkansas and the Upper South Platte projects. So as I mentioned, yep, there's our values. So again, to ensure clean drinking water is available for local communities and downstream beneficiaries. We've talked a lot about that here. Again, the recreation piece, creating accessible, inclusive, and sustainable recreation opportunities. Forest and wildlife, foster healthy, functioning forests to support suitable wildlife habitat, and guide people in communities so they're prepared. This is something that Matt talked about. How are we going to be prepared to receive funds when they're available? That's one of the intent of RMRI, is to help guide communities so they're prepared for the threat and potential impacts of wildfire, but also how to get ahead of it is the theme of this this meeting. So there's the subcommittees. So the 6 subcommittees, won't get into a lot of detail here, but in December of 2019, RMI partners. So this is very much a partner-led effort, a stakeholder-led effort. Stakeholders identified those 3 landscapes I showed you. Stakeholders identified these subcommittees and the work that's going forward. So December of 2019, partners identified the landscape and the landscapes, and also identified the 6 cross-cutting issues and assigned subcommittees to each one of them. Biomass utilization, we talk about that a lot. We've got, what are we going to do with all of Colorado's unmerchantable wood? Big issue. Workforce capacity, how are we going to staff up to do this work, both internally and how we're going to leverage the work with our partners. Where we're going to find the money, funding, the governance, how we're going to manage this thing. That social license and communication, how to generate public buy-in, that's really important. And I hear this from our secretary all the time. As important as the work that we're doing is, and it's vitally important, it's almost just as important how we tell our story, because that's going to make a difference going forward. So those are the subcommittees. Let's see what's up here next. Okay, you saw this slide already. I won't spend a lot of time here. Talked a little bit about it yesterday, but so our shared, just to recap a little bit, the Forest Service initiated our shared stewardship strategy in 2018 to really change our paradigm, how we work with partners to really be at the table at the beginning to design projects. 2019, you've already heard this, Governor of Colorado signed a shared stewardship agreement with USDA that works on forestry, but also recreation. So the pillars here, again, working at scale, big problems require big solutions. And thanks, Rick, for the, kind of the title of this piece. Thank you. So we need to work at scale. And I will say just a little quick note on this, as Andrew talked yesterday about a project on the Bighorn that I can't remember exactly, maybe it was 10 or 15% of that watershed. So it doesn't always have to be hugely at scale, but it has to be in the right place at the right time. So when we talk about scale, and we do clearly talk about it at the landscape level, but we also have to identify the right place to make a difference. So that's work at scale. Cross-boundary solutions, we know our work is beyond our boundaries clearly, and the key, again, joint priority setting. We need to work together to identify the priorities, and that's a keystone of what's happening within RMRI. Let's see, what do we got next? Okay, so there we go. There's the map of RMRI Southwest, and it is the marquee landscape within the initiative. The partners unanimously selected Southwest Colorado as the first place to focus collective efforts. So why? It comprises rural landscapes, we know that, linked by transportation corridors, power lines, and water. It encompasses about 700,000 acres stretching 120 miles along Colorado Highway 160, including the towns of Cortez, Dolores, Mancos, Durango, and the San Juan National Forest. Almost the Rio Grande, but kind of with the San Juan. So why here? Project situated within a forested landscape with a large ponderosa pine component. Fire suppression has led to dense overstock forest there, like everywhere. Forest products industry has increased within the area, providing a viable economic driver for our work, and critical water resources are in the area. So that's kind of the why we landed on that particular landscape. So what have we done? What are some of the accomplishments? There we go. So anyhow, we've treated almost 30,000 acres within. So the intent here is to treat 290,000 acres on National Forest System, another 20,000 acres on private. So far, we're almost 30,000 acres treated, almost 500 homes protected, and you can see 15,000. Let's see, I don't have that slide. I got to turn around. Sorry, 15,440 acres there. So anyhow, lots of achievements already. We're just starting. But that's some of our accomplishments. That's combined both federal and non-federal. Let me go to the next slide. You get a little bit different picture here of so you see the big tall bar, that's, at the end of 10 years, we hope to treat 300, a little over 300,000 acres, and we're on a trajectory to do that. So the next piece will give you a little picture of what that looks like within both our 10-year goal on National Forest System. We're a little ahead of the curve, a little bit behind on private, but we expect that we're going to meet our 10-year goal. We're on a good trajectory to meet our goals, and it's really exciting to do this work again with partners. It's partner-led, and we're actually getting work done on the ground. Next slide, I think, is just a real quick snapshot of the Upper Arkansas project. Again, this was secondary. This project includes Lake and Chaffee counties. headwaters to the largest, Colorado's largest river basin, providing drinking water for over 1 million people. We know the Arkansas River is the most rafted in the country, and the project area hosts over 4 million visitors a year from across the US and around the world. So that's partly why we're focused on the upper Arkansas. Some good work happening there. Won't recap, I just kind of wanted to focus on the Southwest, but I wanted to give you a picture of 2 of the other landscapes. The next is the upper South Platte. And in this one, we're looking at treating up to, let's see, we've got upper South Platte watershed, 885,000 acres, 2,600 square miles extending from Denver metro area to Kenosha Pass. So large landscape here, partly in the western slope, has over 3 million visits, including gold medal trout fishery. So that's our third project area. I'm not really getting into what we're doing there, but that's our third focus area. So the next piece, and I'd like to share with you, is again, telling our story. And this is, I'm about to wrap up here, but this piece is just so important. We've got to be able to tell our story, because this is a way that we get public buy-in through information exchange. We build understanding of what it is, why we're cutting trees if we're cutting trees, why we're doing prescribed burning, why we're doing thinning, all of that. It's just so important to be able to tell our story. You know, when we share our stories, we generate their buy-in. We hope we do. We may not get everybody, but it's really important, again, to be able to do that, and helps mobilize our support. And the piece here about the RMRI effect, we really do hope that that's in play. When we share our stories, we hope that it inspires and catalyzes other projects and other landscapes across Colorado and the West. So that's kind of the intent of why we tell our stories. It's just so important. So with that, I think that's the last one. That's the last one. So again, RMRI is welcome to all. We're working very hard in those landscapes, again, in a shared partnership way. So thanks, and happy to answer questions later.
Frank, if you would hand the microphone and the, oh, no, Elvie's got it, good. But give her the clicker if you would, please.
Good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to give you a little bit of background about SRP before we start kicking into the slides. So Salt River Project is a federal reclamation project located in the Phoenix metropolitan area. SRP is a water and power provider, which most people don't recognize that we have also a water component as well. They always ask me, what is a power provider so interested in forest restoration? So I have to explain we're also a water provider. And as a water provider, we manage 7 dams and reservoirs on 3 different watersheds within the state of Arizona. We deliver 250,000 acre feet of water to over 2 million residents in the Phoenix metropolitan area. And that water that we deliver every year comes from 8.3 million acres of forested watershed in northern and central Arizona. And that is why we care so much about our forests. So what we have noticed over the last couple decades is that we are seeing an increased risk from the wildfires. So since the 1990s, we have seen a 10-fold increase in the number and severity of fires across the watersheds that deliver the water to our residents. In addition to the amount of fires and the severity of those, we have also seen experienced 7 megafires. So those are fires over 100,000 acres in each over our watershed since 2002. And this is an unprecedented thing that has never occurred in previous history in these watersheds, these 100,000 plus acre wildfires. Some of them have even been well over 500,000 acres. One of the things that we know from our partners, and specifically the water that we provide to the municipalities downstream, is that these large wildfires are having devastating impacts on their water treatment capabilities, and also just in the communities that are surrounding, that are located in the forested areas. So some of the impacts that do occur from these large wildfires. So we are seeing the community and property damages. So I'm sure that you all are no stranger to these type of impacts where, you know, not only is it the when you have to pack up and evacuate, those type of community impacts, but it's also the impacts on their properties, their businesses, their livelihoods, the infrastructure that is located in those cities. And that is not something that is easily rebuilt or very quickly rebuilt. On the power side, we have noticed that these fires not only damage the power infrastructure, so you're talking about the poles, the transmission lines, but what is even more important is that during the fire season, it's also the hottest part of the year for the Phoenix metropolitan area. And when wildfires occur near these transmission and distribution lines, the smoke actually trips out those lines, and therefore it reduces our ability to bring power into the cities. And when it's 115, that is probably one of the greatest impacts. And so what happens is we actually, as a power provider, have to go onto the market and buy other power supplies at outrageous cost just to make sure that we can keep the power on for our customers. Because no one as a utility likes to turn off the power in 115 degrees at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. For the water infrastructure side, what we have noticed is that there are increased sedimentation and ash and debris being deposited in our reservoirs, which is our lifeline in the valley because we're a desert area. And when you fill up our reservoirs with sediment, you're reducing our long-term storage capacity, where we store water year over year and we slowly release it, so that way we have ensure we have a reliable supply for the valley. And so not only is it ruining our long-term water storage supply, it also is impacting our dam infrastructure, where a lot of this big material is coming in contact with our dams. And we also have hydropower in those dams as well. And so it hurts our ability to continue generating hydropower as well. Now, the water quality is definitely an issue, but as a raw water provider, it really falls upon our municipalities that we deliver water to. This is the picture up there is an example of a fire that actually hit below our reservoirs. And so we weren't able to hold back that water, and it just went straight into the delivery system. And the water bottle on the right-hand side is what the water that came off of a burn scar was going into our municipal water treatment facilities. They actually had to bypass that water because it was untreatable at that point. We met with one of our recent municipalities, and they said that they've had to install over $200 million in new water infrastructure, treatment infrastructure, to handle the organics that are coming off of these burn scars. And so these wildfires are having direct impacts on our municipalities. Then on the carbon and air pollution, we have a lot of sensitive populations, and these wildfires are releasing large amounts of carbon and also air pollutants that do affect those sensitive populations and throughout Arizona. And then lastly, but not equally as important, is the wildlife and the habitat that is impacted across the watersheds. And we have a lot of endangered, threatened, and special status species throughout Arizona that we all have obligations to ensure that we can continue the livelihood of not only the species, but also their habitats in these forested areas. And so one of the challenges that we have experienced, some of the challenges we have experienced in Arizona is that the just sheer amount of restoration work that has to occur. So in Arizona, we have about 1 million acres across 5 national forests that need to be restored over the next 20 years. Another challenge is that we do have limited forest product industry capacity, meaning we only have a certain number of industry players in Arizona, and they are capped out at restoring 15,000 acres per year. On the other side of that is we also have limited forest product markets, and that the products that they are creating have a lower value. So one of the things that we are very much interested in is how we generate new markets and bring new markets to Arizona. Of course, drought, disease, insect infestations, and climate change are not only magnifying the problem, because you already have all overstocked forest, but when you have trees that are stressed because you have ongoing prolonged droughts, increased temperatures, it stresses those trees more, insects comes in, disease comes in, you have increased more tree mortality, which is just magnifying the problem for us. And then finally, Oh, and finally, sorry. We have U.S. Forest Service's long-term funding, resources, and priorities is also a challenge for us as well. I will note that the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has brought renewed life to the Forest Service's ability to put down payments on these projects and invest in their resources. But long-term, it still is a continued problem moving forward. So some of the solutions that SRP has used more in the coming years and we are investing in moving forward are long-term funding mechanisms, and to really leverage not only our federal partners' dollars, but also our state and our NGO ability and our corporate funding as well, to really bring together this pot of funding that can really help us fund long-term. So for example, one of them is the SRP Healthy Forest Initiative, which is our customer donation program. So our customers are able to donate $3 a month on their electric bill, and we sponsor up to $200,000. So we match up to that within SRP. And then we take those funds together and we invest in forest restoration projects along with the Watershed. And this has been a very, we just launched this program in November of 2020. And we've actually been receiving a lot of recognition for it, not only from our customers, but I think we've also recognized that our non-customers are also donating. So I get checks from people who are not even within our water or electric power service territory who just think this is the right thing to do and want to participate. The other long-term funding mechanism that we are looking at is pairing up carbon and water benefits as a way to attract corporate investment. And so we have been involved in long-term modeling efforts with Arizona State University and the Spatial Informatics Group that can quantify not only the net carbon benefits from removing trees off of landscapes, which I know sounds very counterintuitive, but it works. But we have also built a forest hydrology model with Arizona State University that actually quantifies the water benefits in terms of acre feet from thinning forest. So we look at the existing conditions, we apply the Forest Service's prescriptions, and then we compare the two and we can quantify the water benefits associated with projects before they occur. So then the next piece is we're really moving forward towards long-term landscape partnerships. And this is an example of where we recently have signed 2 MOUs with the Forest Service and our state forester. Each of them are for 10 years. And one of them is to restore one whole watershed to do 31,000 acres of thinning over the next 10 years. The other one is in a national forest, but it actually covers 2 different watersheds, and it's to do 45,000 acres of thinning over the next 10 years. And we know that this is just the tip of the iceberg, knowing that we have approximately another 500,000 acres across the 3 watersheds that we are interested in that need to be restored. So, but this is our first effort on moving forward with these type of partnerships that are focused on long-term collaboration and restoration. And then finally, from SRP's perspective, we know that none of the work can get done on the ground without our forest product industry being healthy and sustainable. They are our implementing arm, and without them, we wouldn't be able to get any of this work done. And so we know in Arizona that we have to support and grow our forest product industry, which means we need to attract new industry, and we also need to expand the markets of what we can do with that material that's coming off of our forest. And one of the key things here is, since Arizona is primarily National Forest Service lands, we have very little private and state lands. The Forest Service is the key piece to that support and growing forest product industry, because they have the ability and the tools to ensure a consistent supply of material to industry. And when we know that industry needs consistent long-term supplies in order to be sustainable over the long term. And that's it. And I wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Elvie. Christina, do you have a live mic yet?
Yes, thank you.
Again? Thank you.
Yes.
Good.
Oh, yes, I do. Thank you. So I want to thank Club 20 for this summit. This is an exciting time for watershed and forest health, and especially this time for collaboration for forest and watershed health. Hearing from the leaders on this panel and hearing from the leaders in all the sessions for the summit, I've just learned so much, and I think there's a lot of momentum moving forward. And I just really also appreciate the power that Club 20 has to elevate these issues and continues to do so. So just want to recognize Club 20 for that. Thank you. So I'm a watershed scientist for Denver Water. I've been with Denver Water for about 6 years, and the watershed scientist position was new when I started at Denver Water. So my charge when I first started there was to build a brand new watershed planning program, building upon the success of our forest health partnerships. So Denver Water has been funding forest health and forest health commitments. Oop, went too far. For over 30 years. Denver Water owns about 60,000 acres in the state of Colorado, and the State Forest Service has been our forester managing our lands for over 30 years. So you can see the outline of just my brief presentation today. I want to talk about just the holistic watershed planning program that I manage and Denver Water's forest health commitments and the history and background, as well as the lessons learned and the return on investment. Thank you, Matt. The lessons learned after we've been investing in our forests and the watershed, and the return on investment for why it's a smart business decision for Denver Water and water utilities to invest in forest and watershed health. So before launching into my main point of the presentation, which is from Forest to Faucet's partnership, I do want to highlight this new watershed planning program that we're building at Denver Water. So wildfire risk is our #1 risk to our water supplies. So certainly a big component of the program is forest health and wildfire risk mitigation. But we're long-range planners. So when you're thinking about protecting our dams and our infrastructure, we're thinking 300 years out. So we have a holistic watershed planning program that is looking really long range in terms of our planning horizon. And we also have very specific action items and plans for just more smaller pieces of the greater watershed, because our watersheds, even though they are divided east-west slope, they're very unique in terms of their geology and hydrology. And so we have specific action items and projects that we implement. And then the kind of like the splat in the middle is post-fire recovery. So I have a really small team. It's just me and 2 other watershed scientists. And we have to drop everything when a fire occurs in the watershed. I'm sure you all understand. So to orient you a little bit to Denver Water's water supply watersheds, over half, so over 54% is national forests. We work with 3 national forests, and it's about 2.5 million acres. And certainly healthy forests equals healthy watersheds in terms of infrastructure protection. So thinking about protecting our dams, our diversions, certainly water quality going into our water treatment plants, as well as community and environmental stewardship. So those are the 3 principles of our watershed planning program. So what motivated Denver Water to start investing in forest and watershed health was incurring the costs after 2 fires. One was the Hayman fire, which you see the burn scar in this photo, in 2002. and a fire that was known as the Buffalo Creek Fire in 1996. And so Denver Water spent about $28 million in recovery following those fires. Of that 28 million, Denver Water spent 18.5 million on dredging Strontia Springs Reservoir, which is where 80% of Denver Water's water supply comes from, as well as 90% of Aurora Water's water supply. So very critical reservoir for water utilities on the Front Range. And the dredging occurred in about 2013. So cost a lot of money for Denver Water. And because of the location of the fires and the size and severity, those watersheds haven't recovered. And so we're still, even after we spent that money on dredging, we're still having to deal with a sediment that continuously moves into Strontia Springs. And just like LV talked about, there's considerations for dam safety. So certainly storage, yes, but also thinking about protecting the dam for 300 years out, because it's very difficult to try to build a new dam. And so it's so important to quantify the value of protecting the infrastructure that you have. And so even though Denver Water spent 28 million after those fires, we're still incurring costs today. And we just recognize that it's a smart business decision to invest in proactive investments. So I have this slide to show you the difference versus 1900 around Cheeseman Reservoir, one of the reservoirs in our South Platte collection system, versus 2002. This was right before the Hayman fire. So you can see definitely the huge difference in the landscapes. And what we're trying to achieve through Forest to Faucets is restoring the forests to become like they were 100 years ago, where they're very ecologically departed right now. I like this image. This is by the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute. It's a really nice way of showing what we're trying to achieve through the From Forest to Faucets partnership. And so you can see the very top, very overcrowded, lots of fuel, lots of species where the needles and branches are low to the ground. And so through the forest restoration techniques that the U.S. Forest Service implements, as well as the State Forest Service and the Natural Resources Conservation Service, they're restoring the forest so that way there's different species, different age classes. It's better for wildlife. You can see the stump for wildlife. So I like this image and just showing exactly what it is that we're trying to achieve through forest restoration. So a little bit more specific about the partnership. It is a $66 million investment among all the partners. Denver Water has committed $33 million so far, and that's matched dollar for dollar by our partners. And it's about 14 cents per month for a customer for Denver Water. So we serve about 1.5 million people. And in doing the math, it's about 14 cents per month. And it's not, I think one point that one of the speakers yesterday with Coca-Cola made was having some of the flexibility from the water utility being detached from city council. And I think that is a big component for why Denver Water has been able to commit so much financially to this, is we have our own independent board, and our customers, their bills go right to paying for our programs at Denver Water. And so we don't have to compete with the other utilities within the city and county of Denver, because we have our own independent budget and board. So I think that has been helpful in getting the funding commitments for this program. We are excited. We're looking to the next 5 years. So we've been doing this for 10 years and it's been a huge success. And so we are looking in years 10 through 15 now. And so we're preparing a memorandum of understanding among all the partners that you see, as well as including the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute as they've been doing monitoring for the effectiveness of the treatments, as well as a return on investment study to quantify the benefits. So sharing some success stories. You see this photo here. This was in 2018. This was the 64A fire that occurred on the Pike National Forest, and this was an area that was thinned. You can see the thin ponderosa pine trees. The thinning allowed the fire basically to drop to the ground, and the local fire responders were able to access the fire safely and suppress it. So that's a really great success story. And in 2020, which was a terrible wildfire season, we did have success with some treatments in the upper South Platte watershed that enabled fire responders to access and suppress a fire that was just upstream of Strontia Springs Reservoir, which is a really critical area for us. So we have many stories like this. Those are just a couple. Certainly the thinning that the State Forest Service did around our facilities at Cheeseman Reservoir right before the Hayman fire occurred saved those facilities. So we have a lot of these stories. So thinking about telling your story, we have a lot of those, and I'm happy to be a spokesperson and provide examples for you. It is really powerful. Another success story in Summit County, they were recognized with the Chief's Honor Award for the collaborative work that was going on in the county. This is the Peak 7 project, and many partners at the table for this. You see in the photo of the Ponzi machine, which I know is a funny name for it. But there's two of these in the state of Colorado, and why this is so successful, and I wanted to highlight it, is this area is really steep, really critical for Denver Water's water supply, but also really critical for community protection in Summit County. And so because of this new innovative machine, they were able to treat these steep slopes. So this was a really exciting story, and just really thrilled that the county and all the partners received this award from the Chief of the U.S. Forest Service. So some lessons learned since we've been doing this for 10 years. In the early years, we treated a lot of easy acres. They were alongside roads, they were easy to access, they were cheaper. But in terms of looking at risk reduction for Denver Water based on Denver Water's values at risk, they weren't, even though they were cheaper, they weren't the biggest bang for the buck. And so really where the treatment goes, it truly matters based on your value at risk that you're trying to protect. The type of treatment matters. So thinking about strategic treatments rather than a shotgun approach, having contiguous treatments, getting to the scale that you need in order to truly change the outcome on the landscape when a fire occurs. Maintenance. So we've seen in some of the early treatments, especially like in Summit County, Grand County, where little baby lodgepole pines are really prolific. And so maintaining those investments is really important. And I think that was something really important to get across to Denver Water in terms of their leadership and thinking about long range planning and budgeting, is that it's not something that we can just throw a bunch of money at and walk away. We have to maintain that investment into the future in order for it to be successful. And finally, through the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute study, the return on investment study, we are seeing a significant return on investment for the treatments, the projects that are in those areas that matter. So the return on investment isn't like a one number thing. It is a range, and it's a range based on where the treatment was in relation to values at risk. So on the upper end of the return on investment, Denver Water is experiencing about a $240 million return on investment in those strategic locations. Oh, and that was my last one. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. Matt? Bring us home.
So in the spirit of storytelling, I'm going to share with you a story of everything working. And instead of me telling it to you, it's a story that some of you have heard and seen, but I think it's absolutely worth seeing again because it speaks to exactly the kind of things that we've just been talking about, and actually really I think will very efficiently sort of tie all of these conversations together. But there's a few themes I want you to think about as you're consuming this video. Number one is we need to act with a sense of urgency. If this is a crisis, we need to respond like it's a crisis. And number two, we have to bring all the resources and all the people to the table so that we can go big, but also stay big. And lastly, you've got to share your success, your unique story, so that we can incentivize others to engage and bring themselves into action as well. And then lastly, this is the most important one. Forestry is and should be portrayed as the beautiful thing that it is in action. So without further ado, a story of everything working.
Is really a story of everything working. In the fall of 2019, our Forest Health Protection Unit in the National Forest identified an outbreak of mountain pine beetle. And mountain pine beetle is a natural part of the ecosystem. They are endemic to the forests all over the state of Colorado and across the Intermountain West, and they serve a natural role. But when they get to that epidemic or outbreak level, they can become a very impactful species. And we have an incredibly large population of lodgepole pine here in the Taylor Basin that is really the last of the unaffected lodgepole forests in the state of Colorado. Many folks if you're from Colorado or you visit Colorado frequently, have experienced the mass mortality events on the I-70 corridor and Highway 40 going up towards Steamboat. And we're set up for a very similar experience if this outbreak went unchecked. And so as soon as the district found this out last fall, we immediately began planning to respond as rapidly as we can. But the uniqueness of this project is that beetles don't know boundaries.
The beetle is spreading so quickly because, first of all, we have these large, mature, overcrowded pine forests that haven't had a lot of forest management. And so basically, they are all the same forest type. They're all the same height. Most of them are the same diameter. They all grew up together. And for a bark beetle, that's like this beautiful buffet because, if you had aspen and Doug fir and spruce intermixed in there, plus different age classes, then it makes it a lot harder for that bark beetle to get around and find the right hosts. When you just have this contiguous forest and everything's the same, then those bark beetle populations are able to just exponentially grow.
And so we knew that we were going to have to work with the communities that are our neighbors right here in the Taylor Canyon in a way that was going to allow us to be as effective as possible and beat the beetles back to the extent that we possibly could. And so we started really three conversations almost simultaneously. One was we knew that we weren't going to be able to move as rapidly as we wanted to using the conventional ways that we put contracts together and acquire services in the Forest Service. So we started dialogue with our friends from the National Forest Foundation.
The unique role that the NFF is able to play as a nonprofit organization, we have a lot of flexibility and nimbleness to able to support our partners at the federal and state level. We're also bringing a unique skill set and having project development, administration, budgeting, fundraising, and all of that has really played a critical role in this project to get us to where we are out here running saws, slowing the spread of this beetle.
The second partner that we reach out to is the Colorado State Forest Service.
And in this project, we've been doing a lot of the actual project layout and design, GPSing and timber cruising and making maps. And now we're really heavily focused on doing the project administration. So working day in and day out with the contractor on the ground, with the individual homeowners out here in the communities, the log truck drivers, and making sure that we do everything that we said we were going to do.
Once we figured out what the extent of the outbreak was and where the affected lands were, we started talking to our neighbors. And that includes the Wilder on the Taylor community as well as the Gunnison Highlands community. Each one of those communities had private landowners within them that had affected stands.
You know, as a homeowner, we were really excited to be a partner in this project. The mountain pine beetle is something that none of us really understand, and it can be really a scary process when you're talking about coming in and logging and taking down trees, et cetera. The way that our homeowners looked at it is, this is a safety aspect, but it's also a preservation project. And all we're here to do is just do our part.
With some really frank conversations and some incredible openness from our adjacent neighbors, we were able to move forward. And that's why there's a helicopter in the air today.
Sean Cheeseman, I'm with CRS Timber Product. We're here today doing some emergency mitigation work on some mountain pine beetle. So we're trying to do just a thinning and try to get all of the infected trees off the stand as possible. We're sitting on a large pocket of undisturbed lodgepole pine in this state. It's one of the last large stands of healthy lodgepole pine, and we're hopes of trying to stay ahead of the beetle problem so we don't lose our last green slopes. We're using the helicopter today to try to get to all that steep ground, try not to have the ground disturbance of ground-based activity. It's working pretty good today. We're trying to get about 450 trees off this 78-acre piece in hopes of trying to get this mitigated for this year and knock it down so maybe next year we can get it buttoned up. There you are. You know, this is high intensity, high speed logging right here, 101. This is actually a pretty good landing location compared to some of the ones we do. But hey, it's a proper tool for the job. We're hoping it'll take off and it'll work. And so it's all about the future of our forest. We're losing so much right now. We've lost so many species already in the pine beetle and the spruce beetle, the fir beetle, the budworm. You know, it's anything we can do right now to save what we got left is the most important thing. And projects like this, we hope make a difference. You know, all we can do is try. It's better than throwing your hands up and giving up on it and saying, just let it do its thing.
that doesn't make me feel good. I don't know what will. So that project really illuminated for me what's possible when we work together, when we set aside jurisdictional primacy, when we share mission, share decision-making, we have the opportunity to go big and stay big. And what I'd like to share with you today is that Senator Bennett's congressionally directed spending that was included in the omnibus bill included $3.68 million for the Colorado State Forest Service, of which upwards to $800,000 will fund phase 3 of that project and completely button up our work in the Taylor Canyon. And based on all the surveys that we've done, the analysis inventory, we feel very confident that we've substantially slowed the potential outbreak that would have potentially unraveled the entire lodgepole stands in one of our largest collection areas in the state for water. So it's inspiring to me now. It's like the 500th time I watched that video. And I hope it's inspiring for you now as well. And so with that, I look forward to our conversation. I hope we have some time for some questions.
We do have time. So what are the questions you need answered to take your newfound inspiration into action? We have a panel of experts here. This is your opportunity right here.
So this is for the regional forester. I really did have a really good question, and then you used the term gold medal trout fishing, and it completely threw me, and I forgot my question because the only thing I could think about was gold medal trout fishing. And then I saw the state forester's video, and it reminded me of my question. And by the way, Matt, it seems like you got another jersey for the team there since that video. But go big and stay big reminded me of my question for Frank, and that is, when you look at your projections, both on scope and scale and the magnitude of the problem, what's the elasticity for front loading this if you were to get additional funding? I know there's ramp up and operational constraints, but in your planning horizon and your scope, if Senator Bennett did this and the elected officials did that and the funding mechanisms were there, do you have an opportunity to bring some of that workload forward to front load to attack the magnitude of what's before us? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And really appreciate the question. And one thing I got from that piece is forestry is cool, right?
Forestry is a beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful thing, and it really makes a difference in protecting our watersheds. So to your question, yeah, thank you very much for the question. And we're working, so when I talk about the work we're doing within the funding work that's coming towards us, again, it builds upon work we've been doing, whether it's RMRI or other collaboratives all across the region, really all across the West. So there's been a lot of work ongoing that will feed into future opportunities. That's one piece. And secondly, we're working on, again, we're focused on the first, initially the first couple of years projects, but we've got a team built within our region that's looking out and working with our forest supervisors across the region. What are those projects? What are those areas we want to focus on in years, whatever it is, 2 through 5 through 7? Yeah, we're building out that work into a 10-year plan and strategy for the region. So yeah, thanks for the question. We're absolutely trying to be prepared, as we were talking about yesterday, be prepared to receive the money. We're doing that same work within the agency.
Hi.
Sonia Chavez.
Sonia Chavez with the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District. For Matt and Frank, Matt, thanks so much for all the good work that you did in the Taylor River Basin. That was really a big example of what can happen when you work together. My other question is, we are seeing a lot of recreational impacts on our forest systems. The Taylor River is one of those where we have really wide OHV use. We say that Taylor, it's called Taylor Dome instead of Thunderdome, like Mad Max Thunderdome, because there are so much recreation OHV vehicle uses that is impacting our wetlands, our riparian areas, illegal roads, trails. What can you do for a small community like us to help us with enforcement on our forest lands?
Well, I was just going to say that I'm not the district ranger in Gunnison anymore. I'm purely focused on forestry, Ryan Finn. So I would love for you to take on this multiple use question.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, great question. And so you're absolutely right. You know, through the pandemic, the recreation use has exploded, right? And so we're working with our folks are out there on the ground. We're really trying to have a presence on the ground. How do we expand that? It's a great question. Working with our partners. We're trying to do as much as we can to educate folks when they're out there. I'll tell you what, particularly that first year, we had a lot of folks camping that had no concept of what they were doing. I mean, none. And I spent time over in Ogden Intermountain region before I came here, and we had folks going to Vegas and then heading to they had no idea what they're doing. So it's just going to take an effort of a lot of us to be there, to be on the ground, to meet people where they're at, and try and give them the tools they need to do the best they can when they're out camping. And the piece we talked about yesterday about campfires, and because most of our fires are human caused, and we just need to continue to enforce that message. When I was a ground pounder, I was out with with our law enforcement officer. I used to do a lot of work in the field in summer and fall, and we came upon a campfire that was abandoned. I mean, they were out hunting, I suppose, and it was died down, but it was still there, and there's this nice 6-pack next to it, and we put it out with the 6-pack. So you do what you can with what you have sometimes.
Yeah, I'm Tim Kylo with Montrose Forest Products, and I just wanted to say to Matt and the Forest Service in general, when you were in the Forest Service, that being a part of the Taylor Park initiative and that 4 very, very hectic months of collaboration to get that project going was probably the most amazing thing that I have been involved with in terms of collaboration and 40 years of being in forestry. And this is just a comment. Without Matt McCombs, that would not have come together, and his drive and initiative, and without the backing of the region. I mean, it was just almost joyous to work with the Forest Service, which was the first in my career, and we'll take care of the recreational folks when the log trucks start running. So that's not good. But using that template as a guide for future management, plus what we're seeing in the Salt River Project and in Denver Water, is really inspiring to me personally as a forester, but also I think to all of us, that we can go big, we can expand this kind of programs on a larger landscape, and really, and with the proof of the Taylor Initiative, we can do it quickly. So it's just a comment. And thank you to all 4 of you for your hard work and effort. Thank you.
One more question.
I might just add a comment. That's what this is what inspires me. I want this to be the Colorado way. That in this leadership role that I've now assumed, that taking those experiences to scale is really what we're trying to achieve. And I can tell you, in that basin, the relationships between the State Forest Service, private landowners, county governments, the environmental community, U.S. Forest Service, and BLM, there's a great deal of trust and familiarity. And they see each other differently. Their instincts and how they engage with each other are different. And we're hoping to double down with that across the entire state of Colorado for certain, and try to create space for people to sort of let down again those organizational boundaries that exist and see each other as resources that they can activate in this time of crisis. And so it's a great story to tell, and it truly is a story of everything working. And we're going to continue to engage employees and engage communities in a way that tries to create an organizational culture that this is just the way we do business.
And I was going to add, thank you. And what we talk a lot about in the agency, wanting to be an employer of choice, we also want to be a partner of choice. So I appreciate what you said. And we don't want to be the enemy or the bad guy. I sat down yesterday at the table and somebody said, glad you're here, Forest Service. We like to keep our friends close and our enemies closer. And, a smile. But we really do want to work together. And any barriers that have been there in the past, hopefully, for whatever reason, I'm hopeful that we can work through those and be really strong partners going forward. Thanks.
So one more, Chris?
Yeah, plenty of time.
Okay.
And you all know from yesterday, you don't want to leave questions to me, so.
Is it on?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, you can.
Thank you. I'm Tim Redmond, newly elected Routt County Commissioner, member Club 20. One of my concerns is as we're moving forward, when we've had these fires and we have all this sedimentation, what is that doing to our rivers and our reservoirs? And you're saying you're looking 300 years out. What can we do to protect ourselves in that situation?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. I think that gets to more of thinking holistically about the watershed. So certainly the sessions yesterday talked about beaver dam analogs and riparian restoration. I think there is, you can't put all your eggs in one basket, basically. That's kind of been my approach for the program at Denver Water is, yes, wildfire risk is our #1 risk, but watersheds are complex. And so, for instance, abandoned mines, how do fires impact that? Get into the sediment and then into the rivers and then to your reservoir. So it's such a complex issue, but I think that's always my biggest takeaway is not to put all your eggs in one basket. Think about planning for when there's a fire. Think about post-fire recovery. Think about making your good watersheds more resilient or how you can protect that currently. So it's dependent upon the unique watershed and the circumstances. But I think having multiple options, like we've funded with Aurora Water, a stream restoration. And that has saved a lot of sediment from coming downstream to Strontia Springs. And actually in this next agreement with the U.S. Forest Service, we're looking at funding not just typical forest treatments, wildfire risk reduction, but we're also looking at stream restorations, riparian plantings, and more ecological solutions, specifically upstream of Strontia Springs Reservoir on the Pike National Forest. So I hope that answers your question.
I'll also jump in real quickly. So on the smallest watershed that we're actually going to begin thinning soon, we did a cost benefit analysis. It's a 64,000 acre watershed with about 37,000 acres worth of treatment on it. We did the cost benefit analysis that if there were to be a catastrophic wildfire that would come through the smallest of our watersheds, you're looking at about $293 million in damage, not only to the water infrastructure, to our downstream water users that would no longer be able to use that water, but also in post-wildfire mitigation efforts to help restore some of that landscape. And comparison, it's going to cost about 50 to 60 million just to thin that watershed. So there is a huge difference in terms of economics and being preventative. The other thing I would mention when it comes to sediment into streams and reservoirs, and what we have been noticing is that the danger really is during the monsoon season when you have intense precipitation events, and it sends a huge slug of this type of material into the streams, the lakes, and the reservoirs at very fast rates. And when you have very steep canyons where people like to recreate, what we have noticed is that there are property losses of life in these huge post-wildfire flooding events that are very dangerous to everyone. And then what SRP has been doing to help with that is that we've been installing what we call photography. It's cameras with gauges. And so that way I've been implementing these on some of these burn scars. So that way we can have advanced notification of when this slug of material is going to be coming in, and we can also send out alerts to not only the Forest Service but also to our partner cities to let them know that this material, this type of water quality degradation is going to occur and that they can prepare for it.
Got one here, Chris.
Good. Also a reminder for those of you online, you can put a question in the chat and Brittany will relay that. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm John Twitchell of the Colorado State Forest Service. And I guess, Frank, I guess this question will be to you. This has been very inspiring, and having lived and still living through the aftermath of the beetle epidemic, Matt, that's incredible. You got the NEPA through, because one of the frustrations, in the early 2000s was we would identify where the beetles were, knew we had to get them. It was at least a 3-year. It was 3 years down the line before the process followed through. And by then the beetles had moved to the next stand and we were always chasing our tails. And I work for the state, but we worked with our federal partners. So my question is this, and I haven't heard much of it, in the last couple of days. To go big, how do we scale up NEPA in a way, because that's key to what we need to do. And we can't just keep going project to project. Lava was inspiring. A lot of that landscape burned up in the Mullen fire, but how can we take those lessons without undercutting NEPA, understanding the integrity of the law, but applying it in a much more efficient way that allows us as land managers to get our jobs done?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so a couple of things here. One, we need to use all the tools in our toolbox, whether it's categorical exclusions. We have a lot of categorical exclusions that can apply, but also we can do streamlined environmental assessments that can be done quicker. And I'm curious, I want to give Matt a chance to respond too about exactly what you use to get that done in 4 months. But the other thing is we got to do our projects, you're right, at bigger scale. I mean, like 80,000 acre scale instead of 5,000 acre scale. If you just do the math to do the type of work we're talking about, 20 million acres over 10 years, you divide that out, kind of like what you did with your 14 cents per customer. We just have to do, we have to look at projects on a much broader scale, even if we're not going to treat all 80,000 or whatever we're doing, but the landscape you're looking at is larger and you identify treatments within there, you get the project done, the decision done, and then you implement as you get funding. But Matt, tell me how you got to that done in 4 months.
Farm Bill CE.
There you go.
It was
one of our tools.
It was identified in the governor's declaration. It was already mapped. We met the exact criteria for which the categorical exclusion was designed, and we engaged with a sense of urgency, and we leveraged every single voice in the room. And we did, Sam Pankratz, the forester from the State Forest Service, we ensured that we did what we said we were going to do, and that builds confidence and it demonstrates our competence. And that's extremely valuable to the community. And it put in my mind this idea that success begets success. Now the Gunnison Basin knows that they can go big, and it's hopeful, right, that they can stay big. And I'd add to that following that CU, it dovetails with a environmental assessment that the district led that analyzed 240,000 acres, cleared 22,000 acres of treatment to include 4,000 acres of stand replacement fire in 18 months. It's possible, but it takes a will and it takes courage, but it also takes community support in a way that allows people to step out and manage risk effectively. Because there are folks in this world that don't necessarily agree that forestry is a beautiful thing in practice. And so we've got to meet them where they are and engage them in ways that are meaningful and authentic, and help them acknowledge that their voices are equally important in the conversation, and that we make commitments as it relates to best management practices, as it relates to the type of impacts that we're honest, and that we live up to our word, and we demonstrate that we're capable of doing what we said we were going to do, and be a reliable return on investment.
Elvie?
So I'd just like to add on that in Arizona, we have the Forest Restoration Initiative, very similar to what you all have here. And I would say that landscape scale NEPA planning is something that we have been very successful for. So we, in our area, we were able to issue the first landscape EIS, and that one was for 500,000 acres. And we just recently did another round of EIS, and that one is for approximately 900,000 acres. And so I think are kind of a platform to understand how you can do landscape scale EIS NEPA analysis and have those treatments available. I can tell you it takes a long time. It's very painful. Collaboration is not easy, and it requires everybody to come to the table to work together, but it is an example of how that collaboration can achieve landscape scales.
I thought Christina's 300-year planning horizon was because of the EIS process.
I was just going to add one more thing real quick. The other thing we can look at is programmatic adaptive, environmental analysis, so that if a condition change, you've already got the NEPA done and you can implement the project.
And that's what that Taylor EA was, a conditions. In fact, Frank, I may or may not have advanced NEPA in conditions-based NEPA before the NEPA reform was done. But another thing is that we leveraged one of the reasons I applied for this job, and it's because I kind of fell deeply in love with the State Forest Service through that project. This unique capacity that the state has, that when the feds show up and say, "Hi, I'm here to help, and I'm from the federal government," it's not always as well received as you might think. It's very strange. But at the same time, when the State Forest Service shows up and says, "Hi, I'm Sam. I've been in the community for this many years, and I happen to know all of you. I've been working with your neighbors for for years and years with successful projects." It just is a different, they're received just differently. And so letting each, and maybe it's a nonprofit partner, maybe it's a utility, that's coming forward and saying, "Hey, this is critically important to your watershed." That message and the way it's delivered is extremely important. So let those voices that are best suited to advance the mission be the ones that are the voices in the room. And again, that's sharing in decision space, sharing some of the primacy that we have over our roles in this world. In a way that allows us to put our best foot forward when we're trying to move expeditiously in a crisis mindset.
Great lessons. Great question. Thank you. Brittany, we have somebody online that has a question.
Yes. Pickens County Commissioner Steve Child asks, when you are logging to control bark beetles, what do you do with the slash and bark? Do you mulch it, which I think would kill the beetles, and put the organic matter back into the ground? Do you haul any to waste to power plants to burn? Or do you burn the slash piles? I'm thinking about what would be the most effective for killing the beetles while having the least carbon footprint.
But the great story, at least as it relates to that Taylor project, was that the majority of it went to the mill and it was turned into dimensional lumber. It's now the carbon is captured and the beetles are dead. And so, I mean, that's the best way that we leverage industry, is that is by using that unique tool that's available to us. And the Ponzi, I want to come back. Like I love the Ponzi system. Like you are going to see more than 2 machines in the state of Colorado. That I guarantee, because that steep slope work is the most important work. And so leveraging all of the unique tools that industry can bring to the table to achieve those objectives as it relates to arresting infestation and the impacts, but also capturing the carbon in usable fiber products. They benefit the people here in Colorado, but certainly across the country as well.
Steve, Commissioner Child's question raises a question I had. You've talked about cost benefit and return on investment. You've talked about the value goals, and the benefits are apparent. What is the carbon calculation of forest health and forest thinning and the work that's being done? I mean, what is the sequestration versus liberation calculation? Is that done?
That's a great question. I don't have a great answer for it, to be honest with you, but it's work that we need to be digging into, because it helps tell the story. Climate change is a major focus of this administration, and I think we can do more work around that piece. I did some work in that area 10, 12 years ago. It's been a minute, but yeah, it's an area that maybe you can speak to a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So we have undertaken a number of carbon modeling scenarios, primarily for that smallest watershed. That's my all-time favorite. And there are different modeling techniques out there that can be used. And I like to explain to some of our partners about, they're always like, well, you're removing trees, you're reducing the carbon stock. How are you actually saving net or creating net positive benefits? And I said, well, the first piece is that you're actually avoiding the wildfire. So that big release of carbon and the decaying material that occurs after that. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that you are allowing for the healthier, more resilient trees to grow stronger and bigger over time. The third piece is that the material from those forest restoration projects are actually going to industry products that store the carbon in those type of products. And then the final piece is what we call delayed regeneration, which is that we know when you have a high severity fire, that the likelihood of that forest to return to its original state is very unlikely. And especially in some of these transitional vegetation zones where we're seeing increasing temperatures, it's not returning back to pine forest. And so when you add all those up, there is actually a net carbon benefit over a 40-year life cycle. And so one of the examples is we worked with the National Forest Foundation on a carbon modeling project where they estimated that there's about 25.9 tons of CO2 benefits per acre of restoration on some of our watersheds.
I'm gonna have you say that into my phone later. That was the most comprehensive answer I've heard actually anywhere. That was fantastic. Ladies.
That was
All right, let's give
really
her a round
good.
of applause. I mean, that's it.
And thanks
do
for the
this a lot.
save. Yeah, thanks for the save. That was really good.
Yeah, well, I would just say, so that's a key question. And, we're in dialogue with the Nature Conservancy and others here in the state of Colorado where, carbon accounting is important and it gives us credibility. And so we are working, but one of the benefits of being nested in the Warner College of Natural Resources at CSU is we have incredible access to a lot of fresh young minds and old crusty, wise minds. And so we're trying to work with grad students. In fact, we just launched a project 3 weeks ago with a couple of grad students and doctoral students to try to build the very first layer of a carbon accounting tool that we'd be able to apply to projects that we do in Colorado. They would demonstrate what the trade-offs and the benefits are with forest management as it relates to carbon. So we're moving down that path as well. And I'm going to be getting them in contact with you.
Another question out there? You've been warned. If you don't, I've got more.
Matt, I don't know if it's wise, but from a crusty old mind, it's one of those things. I know we got some additional speakers coming up, but I just don't want us to leave this room without really taking in this moment in time. And that is, I really think that there's a strong opportunity, given the partnerships and the leaderships up on that stage, that we look at this sense of urgency and we look at this will that's being demonstrated. And all of us in this room, there's a lot of political clout that can't be lost on this moment in time, because I think we're off to a great start. And I think we've got a good foundation, but I think we need to see sustainability as it pertains to funding and commitment. And where Senator Bennett talked about that, the chief of the Forest Service is committed, the regional forester is committed, but these are down payments in terms of the future. So we just have a wonderful opportunity to sustain this through the state and federal partnerships. And we all have a responsibility in this room to lean into it to make sure we don't lose this momentum. So.
Well said. Thank you. Cindy Dozier has a question. Make me walk.
Merritt and I are the long and the short of it for sure. So here's my question, and it regards something that Elvie said about cost benefit analysis. And in your planning process, as part of your reporting, do you talk about cost per acre to deal with a wildfire as opposed to the cost per acre to deal with management that would prevent or reduce the catastrophic nature of the wildfire? I think we've had so many fires now, and you see millions and millions and millions of dollars spent not only on fighting the fire, but on the recovery process. Has somebody calculated all of that and then looked at forest management as in the cost benefit analysis piece to reduce cost?
Thank you for that question. Yes, so SRP, we have a forest health goal, and our goal is to help support the thinning of 500,000 acres by 2035. In order for our leadership to move forward with that sustainability goal, we had to do extensive analysis that looked at many different aspects and how you quantify the benefits of watershed restoration and forest restoration. So looking at the differences by doing preventative treatments versus the catastrophic nature of what could happen and comparing the differences in economics there. We also looked at the economic development opportunities. When you invest in restoration, there are jobs created, there are markets created, and there are additional tax benefits to the local communities that come from that. And then we also compared it on how when investing in our forest and also our forest product industry that is needed to implement these treatments. We looked at it from an investment where we not only have to invest in the projects up front, so getting the treatments done up front, but we also need to be investing in our infrastructure and our industry, because that's where you get a lot of your cost efficiency savings. You could be paying $2,000, $3,000 per acre, but if you have a healthy forest product industry, those costs could potentially come down and you get a lot of cost savings for that. And one of the reasons we went, examples of how we invested in our forest product industry is we passed a state tax credit law. It was called the Healthy Forest Production Tax Credit, where we actually say forest product industry, for the amount of tons that you chew through every year and create commercially marketable products, we will pay you, I think it was $10,000 for every, I think it was, 2,000, or I forget the differences, but we start at $10,000, it goes up to $500,000, and it's for them to chew through tonnage every single year. And it's an investment in them to not only increase their capacity, but also to attract new industry to Arizona. So that was one example of how we are investing in our industry.
Thank you. We're going to allow you to be the last word so we don't step on the Congresswoman's time. Please join me in thanking Frank, Elvie, Christina, and Matt.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's on. I don't know if you've all noticed, I actually am not the Congresswoman. She is making her way up here right now. Once again, Brad McLeod, I am the chair of Club 20, and I am very honored to have all of you here today. One of the things that we always talk about that I take a lot of pride in is kind of like we've done over the last couple of days. Club 20 is a great organization for creating accessibility for experts in the field, accessibility for exchanging ideas and talking. And we work very hard also to make for our members, local, state, and even our federal representatives accessible. So having taken office in 2021, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert is completing her first term as representative for Colorado's 3rd Congressional District. She currently serves on the Committee of Natural Resources, Subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples of the United States, and the Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife. Sorry, wildfire was all day for me yesterday, and wildlife. Now here to discuss her forest health legislation, please welcome Representative Congresswoman Lauren Boebert.
Good morning, everyone. It is such an honor to be here with you all. And truly, it's been an honor to represent Colorado's 3rd District for the past year. Thank you so much to Club 20 for allowing me this time to speak with everyone and connect. This is one of my favorite things, is to hear from you, hear experts like we just had on the stage that have innovative ideas on how to manage our lands properly rather than just introducing frivolous lawsuits and locking up our land so we aren't able to actively manage that. I do want to talk to you today about my forestry legislation, but before we get into that, we are truly at an energy crisis here in America. And it's been really frustrating from Washington, D.C., because I see a lot of virtue signaling and I see a lot of fake bills that have a title of one thing, but do something completely different. And this is a con game that has been being played for the entire year that I have been in Washington, D.C. So it's pretty frustrating when first we get something called an infrastructure bill that spends $1.2 trillion and only 9% of it goes to actual infrastructure. This is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. That's an absolute con game. I had an infrastructure bill. 100% of it went to actual infrastructure and it didn't cost you anything. We didn't add any new money to the debt. We didn't raise taxes. We weren't printing money that we don't have. It was using unspent COVID funds for actual infrastructure needs that we have in the United States. And more recently, we passed a $1.5 trillion bill. It was over 2,700 pages. And members in the House had 22 hours to read the bill. There were $4 billion in earmarks. And if you aren't too familiar with earmarks, well, that's just corrupt politicians' ways of buying votes. There were certainly some legislative wins that I have received this year, but none of them required an earmark. They went through the proper legislative process. They went through committees, they were voted on and placed into bills appropriately. And I'd like to tell you just a couple of those. Well, we had 9 of them, but I'll go through them quickly. We had $1.74 billion for community health centers to serve rural communities. $515 million for the PILT program, which is fantastic for our rural communities. I've spent a lot of time down in Hinsdale County where they are receiving somewhere around 7 to 10 cents per acre, where higher populated communities like Mesa County receive closer to 40 cents per acre from the federal government on these lands that they are not able to generate revenue from. There was also $48 million for the U.S. Forest Service to address the bark beetle infestation ravaging Colorado and actively manage our forests. This is something I've worked on just about every single day as your representative here in Colorado, because we do need to actively manage our forests. There was $10 million for the Indian Irrigation Fund to benefit the Southern Ute tribe. I've had such a pleasure working with them. $1 million to compensate farmers for livestock loss to wolves. Very important here in Colorado. And I've attended many wonderful wolf hearings, and I want you all to know I will not stay in my lane when it comes to wolves. I understand that this is something that Colorado has put forward, but as a federal representative, I will do whatever I can to protect the farmers and ranchers in Colorado from this wolf introduction. We've also, I prevented the greater sage grouse from being listed as an endangered species. Now, this is a common bird that really hinders a lot of what we try to do when we want to use our rich resources here in Colorado, when we want to actively manage our lands. And it's really unfortunate when something like a common bird gets in the way. This bird is legal to hunt in other states, but not in Colorado. It's kind of like what we've been seeing on the national news, like when a common athlete decides he feels pretty and wants to be a girl, then he can go and beat girls and win national championships. But I digress. So some other wins that I thought were really great for Colorado especially were from the National Defense Authorization Act. Now, this is something that funds our military and even gave our military a raise. It was really an interesting time because this is something that Republicans wanted to pass, but this bill was extremely woked up. And I won't get into all of those details today. But what was most important to me in this piece of legislation were the Colorado land grabs. At the very last minute, Diana DeGette's Wilderness Bill and Joe Negus's Core Act were crammed into the NDAA. And while I'm pleading with Republicans in my conference to make amendments to many things in this bill, I was told, well, we don't want an attack ad for voting against our military, so we're going to allow the Senate to fix it. Well, I wasn't hired to work in the Senate. I was hired to work in the House of Representatives, and I was not putting a yes vote to that bill in the form that it was in. It was really frustrating that so many people were afraid of an attack ad. I arrived in DC on attack ad, so I'm not really afraid of another one. And I certainly support our troops too much to put them through what that bill wanted to do. So I went to the senators after it passed the House and I said, listen, you already know about this other garbage that's in this, red flag laws for our military personnel, transgender surgeries for our military personnel, Department of Combat Extremism, and we don't know what that is. Maybe it's still standing for the United States flag. Maybe it's a mom or dad going to a school board meeting because now they're designated domestic terrorists. We don't really know because they didn't explain that. But I went to the senators and I said, I need you to protect Colorado's land. 761,000 acres would have been locked up with these two bills. Nearly 1,000 miles of our river in our district, untouchable. Can you imagine if I introduced legislation for Representative DeGette's district and said, listen, this 16th Street Mall here, I'm going to go ahead and designate that wilderness. I think most of us can agree it is pretty wild and scenic down there, but that's her district and that's her business. This is my district, and I was elected to protect our lands, to protect the people who want to steward our lands, take good care of our environment. And that's not with a hands-off approach. So I'm proud to say when the NDAA came back from the Senate, those Colorado land grabs were out of the final bill. Now it is my job to go to bat for Western Colorado. Sorry, I want to go back 1 second with these con bills. I really wanted to touch on the oil and gas ban. Nancy Pelosi didn't stop at the $1.5 trillion bill. She also introduced a bill that was suspending Russian energy imports. And that sounds really great. I even have a bill to ban Russian energy imports. We need to be energy independent right here in Colorado and in America. And we need to pursue energy dominance. We can literally export freedom to Europe, who relies on Russia for 40% of their energy. Now, this bill that just a few of us voted against was littered with waivers that allow Russian oil and gas to continue flowing. Joe Biden at any time can say these sanctions don't touch oil and gas. So this was a fake Russian and oil gas bill. And I was not voting for this to just signal to someone of a title that sounds good. But it is my job to fight for you, to fight for Western Colorado and the issues that face us here in the Western Slope. I think that we can all agree that our issues are misunderstood, misrepresented, and completely ignored by urban politicians and a lot of special interest groups from the coastal areas of our country. And that's a huge part of why I ran for office. Tackling wildfires is going to take an all hands on deck approach. We need everyone to do their part. And I've had a great time working on this with many people across the aisle, trying to come up with good solutions on how we can actively manage our forests and prevent wildfires, because wildfires are no longer just a Western or rural issue. Last year, for about a week, the entire or much of the United States was covered in smoke from Oregon and Washington fires. And of course, we are all familiar with the Marshall Fire that took place in urban Colorado. We need to bridge this divide and unite land managers, timber industry, and even the environmentalists to restore our forests and protect our watersheds. This is a really big deal for us here in Colorado, and the usual political fault lines cannot and should not hinder our progress on the issue, because we have learned that the costs of doing nothing are far too high. We can no longer have a reactive approach. We need to be proactive when it comes to managing our forests. And according to the Colorado State Forest Service, more than 24.4 million acres of Colorado forest land impacts Colorado's water supply, where 80% of the state's population relies on those forested watersheds for municipal water supplies. America is blessed with an abundance of resources, and the federal government's negligence on this issue has victimized our communities. And every summer, it's the same old story with massive wildfires scorching the West. Farmers lose their livestock, families lose their homes, and people sometimes even lose their lives. And the most frustrating part about it is that this is absolutely preventable. It doesn't have to be this way. If we start actively managing our forests and protecting our watersheds, we can drastically reduce the severity and frequency of these massive fires. For example, our overgrown forests in Colorado and the West, where we once had 50 to 100 trees per acre, now see 50 to 1,000 trees per acre. And according to the Forest Service, more than 1 billion acres throughout the country are at risk of catastrophic wildfire. Active forest management is scientifically proven to reduce fire severity, and it's good for forest health. Now, here in Colorado, there have been a lot of things that we have been subjected to, and we really are at the altar of climate change. And don't worry, folks, I'll let you know climate change is absolutely real. It happens 4 times every year. As long as we have weather on the earth, the climate will change. But at this altar of climate change, there's so much sacrifice to actual stewardship of our lands and to our environment. Look at the mining that takes place to create these electric vehicles. Look at the mines in Craig, Colorado, where they're the only mine that's actually required to restore the land that has been mined. These lithium mines are not required to do that, but our coal miners are, and they do a darn good job at it. Now, in relation to wildfires, Colorado saw 3 of the largest wildfires that we've had since we've been recording this data in 2020, right here in our district. Just one of these catastrophic wildfires produced more carbon emissions in just a few short days than every single vehicle, every diesel truck, tractor, 4-wheeler running in the state of Colorado 24/7. So if you're really serious about the environment, if you're really serious about reducing carbon emissions, our forests is where we need to begin. We have more than 6 billion standing dead trees in the Western United States, and it's creating a massive tinderbox. That's why my forestry legislation, which is the most comprehensive forestry legislation that's been put forward in 10 years. You're moving a lot over there. Am I out of time? Okay. I didn't know if you wanted me to see you. It is the most comprehensive forestry bill that has been introduced in decades. And it creates in it something that I'm very proud of, the Western Bark Beetle Epidemic Fund. And it's a $126 million account to remove beetle-killed trees. And it's financed entirely by revenue from timber sales. So we can protect our forests, remove the dead timber that are eyesores to our community, and combat this growing tinderbox at zero expense for the taxpayers. This is something that I am most proud of. Healthy forests are critical to maintaining healthy watersheds. And it's amazing. I actually was in a meeting in Montezuma County just a couple of days ago, and we were talking about phreatophytes and watersheds. And a low estimate in Montezuma County is all of the phreatophytes that are there that have been documented, the tamarisk and the Russian olive trees. They consume about 100,000 acre feet of water a year. So there are real solutions that we can put forward to protect our forests and our watersheds and end this massive tinderbox. So I guess, are we gonna have time for Q&A? Okay, all right, we're gonna do some Q&A. I really do appreciate you all. It's been such an honor to work on these issues because of course I promised that I would be a strong voice and a fighter, but I promised you that I would work for you. And serving on the Natural Resource Committee has certainly given me the ability to have a seat at the table and be your voice on these issues.
Congresswoman, thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. If you go give a round of applause really quickly. So got a couple of minutes, I think, still to be able to do some Q&A. So I'll find out who my folks are with the mics so we can ask some questions. I can see Merritt, so I'm going to go to him really quickly. And he's got a question in the back, I think, with Cindy. If you don't mind, though, while they're going there, you've talked about a little bit about how comprehensive this bill is and how you put it together. I think it's like roughly 40+ pages.
Yes.
You've done several tours in the area. Can you talk about how those tours of some of the areas that you've been influenced that bill, or how you put that together for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we certainly did have a tour throughout the district with foresters and talking about just how important it is to manage our forests in many different ways. But we really wanted to authorize stewardship in the district and say that it's okay to actually manage this stuff and take care of our lands. But seeing the 6 billion standing dead trees, some of the 6 billion standing dead trees that are in the West is certainly concerning. We all choke on the same smoke each and every year from the wildfires in our area. And it's high time that we get proactive about this. Sure, we can talk about down payments to our future and putting forward billions of dollars to prevent wildfires, but there's actually a way to do that that doesn't cost you money. I think we're all paying enough right now when it comes to the crises that have been created by bad policy, the supply chain crisis, the inflation that's up because government just keeps printing and spending more and more of your money, far more than it takes in each and every year. So keeping this a conservative, fiscally responsible piece of legislation was a very high priority for me. And then of course, Colorado is the most beautiful state in the union. It is breathtaking. And I think I serve one of the prettiest districts in the United States. And I want to keep it that way.
I appreciate that. Okay, we've got a question in the back now. Please remember, especially for the folks that are online, when you ask your question, we'll try to keep it, we're short on time, so try to keep it close to topic matter, but also make sure to introduce yourself so those online know who's asking the question and what we're doing in the back. I know who you are, but would you introduce yourself quickly?
Good morning, Cindy Dozier, Club 20, Colorado Forest Water Alliance, Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. Thank you so much for being with us this morning, and I particularly appreciate your staff being present for the last day and a half for these high-level discussions regarding watershed health and forest health and their interaction. And I just will say the same thing to you that I said to Senator Bennett this morning. Please utilize Club 20 as you develop legislation, work with us. The subject matter experts within this room right now is out the roof. And we have had awesome discussions and just urge you to be sure and keep that in mind and utilize the resources that we offer here. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And I do want to praise my staff. They are incredible. My staff is handpicked to serve our district well and with excellence. The one person who wanted to be here today that could not is my Chief of Staff, Jeff Small, and he was the Executive Director for the Western Caucus in Washington, D.C. for quite some time. And he was also an advisor to Secretary Bernhardt, which was just an incredible highlight of his life. And he's honored to be serving all of you in Colorado's 3rd District. So we certainly have some insight from the district. Chief Jeff Small has been involved with Club 20 for quite some time. And I'm very, very grateful for this organization, for the people who invest their time, their knowledge to be a part of this and share that information. So that's something that we certainly will continue to utilize in the future.
Okay, and I think we've got time for one last question. I wasn't sure. I'm going to defer because our immediate past chair, Merritt Linke, knows quite a bit about wildfire, being a county commissioner from his region. I didn't know if you had the last question or if you were referencing someone else for me here. So Merritt, reintroduce yourself. I've already told the whole room who's asking the last question, I guess, but please,
All
if you
right.
would.
So thank you. And thank you for being here, Congresswoman. So yes, I am Merritt Linke, and as of 2 days ago, I am no longer the chair of Club 20. My 2-year term did end, and your current chair is there on stage with you, Brad. So I'm also a county commissioner in Grand County, and as most of you know, that's where our water starts. It runs right by through Mesa County and on into Arizona and those other projects, which the last panel really made me conscientious of what some of this big picture stuff is all about. And I can talk about a little hay meadow that I irrigate every summer, and I get a little crop of hay off of it, one of many that I do, but it's right across from Lake Granby. And last summer, I used an irrigation tarp, and I know there's many of you in this room that know what that is. You just submerge it in the ditch and it backs it up and dams up that little ditch, and you flood it over and you make a cut with your shovel and you flood your hayfield. That's how it works. But last summer was really interesting when I pulled that tarp out to change it, which you do every couple of days so you can get the water spread all over the whole entire hayfield. That thing was covered with sludge that what looked like used motor oil, and it smelled like a sewer. It was really interesting because that watershed was part of the whole East Troublesome fire that drained down into that collection system, went in and normally it goes into Lake Granby or Grand Lake, goes through the Adams Tunnel and irrigates thousands and thousands of acres all the way out to Sedgwick County, Colorado. So I think it was really interesting, and that last panel really made me aware of the big picture scheme of this. So I don't really have a question, but I guess it's kind of a request along with what Cindy Dozier did. And Senator Bennett did reference me this morning in terms of my support for his bill, which I did. And I did agree that it is a start. It's a good start. And I think that is where we have to start. And the perception shift is happening. The perception shift is happening. The comment this morning about go big and stay big and forest management in action is a beautiful thing. We wouldn't have said that 3 years ago. We wouldn't have said that 5 years ago. We're saying that now. And maybe it's because the smoke got to New York City last summer. I'm not sure, but we are seeing a perception shift. And I guess I would ask you to do everything you can do to work with your people across the aisle, your fellow legislators, and keep this stuff going, keep this momentum. And yes, there is a lot of money, and make sure that we can find out ways to most effectively put it to work. How can we make sure that these projects on the ground that are significant, as we learned in that last panel, the success stories, and make those bigger and better and sustainable long into the future. So that's my only thing. I don't really have a question, just would a request for you to do everything you can, which I know you are, but continue that work. And as Cindy said, use Club 20 to help you administer and implement those projects to move this forward and continue to do so for a long time. And again, thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you. And, I do agree that we need to work across the aisle on this issue. And I'm really glad that that perception shift is taking place. I think a lot of us have been touting for a long time that we need to actively manage our our forests. But we've been interrupted by frivolous lawsuits and wilderness designations. And for far too long, Washington politicians have spent well beyond their means and just thrown more taxpayer money at the problem without coming up with an actual solution. And so I have looked at Senator Bennett's bill. It's just a little too pricey for my taste. And but he and I have had discussions about this, and I'm happy to continue working with him. There's just a better way than continuing putting our country in debt when we're looking at $30 trillion in debt right now. And just one last thing, that sludge that you mentioned, this is part of wildfires impacting every part of our lives. When we have this dead timber, this tinderbox that's creative, and we had these massive wildfires, then we have the mudslides and we have contamination in our watersheds. I was with the mayor of Glenwood Springs, and he showed me their water samples, and it was downright disgusting. But not only did that mudslide affect the water, it also affected travel throughout not just Western Colorado, but really the United States. I mean, that is a big connector. I-70 is a huge connector. And when that's shut down, it impacts all of us. So I was proud to have led the charge to bring $110 million into the district to reopen I-70 quickly and safely and responsibly. And now we are actively looking at alternative routes because we do need to look at the situation as a whole. Things like this will happen again, and we need to be prepared when they do. And I think now is a great time to start managing our forests. Club 20, it has been a privilege and an honor to be here with you all today. God bless you all, and I will see you soon.
Congresswoman, thank you. Like I said before, I think one of the best things about Club 20 is the accessibility to experts and the accessibility to our elected officials. And we sincerely appreciate you coming and making yourselves available. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeez Louise, good catch, Brad. Applause for Brad. Nice.
Throughout the past 2 days, we have spent time framing the issue with our watersheds, discussed how to elevate their value in land management decisions, identified local impacts and the importance of building a business case for watershed restoration, and have gained a better understanding of what it takes to take these projects to scale quickly. Here to help us take all that we have learned to move it into action is Sue Hansen, Montrose County Commissioner and Club 20 Executive Committee member. Thank you, Sue. And this mic is on.
I'm the only thing that stands between you and a bag of chips. So some of the best advice I ever received was to be brief and be seated, and I will do just that. But I have a few things to say because at least for me, I've learned a lot in the last couple of days. I stand before you as a humble elected official, more of a public servant, and with full transparency, wanted to let you know that when I took office about 3.5 years ago, I knew absolutely nothing about watershed, never gave forest health a thought. It was the furthest thing from my mind. With the help of, I want to say needling, but I'm going to use the word persistent attention from Nancy Fishering and Cindy Dozier, who essentially whispered in my ear about watershed protection and forest health and really drilled home the message. So I wanted to make sure that I let you know that I really come to you without having any knowledge of that, but it's important, and I realize the importance of it at this point. And so I think the time is now for us to get busy to start talking about what we're going to do. You've heard this message a lot. We've been talking about it. I mean, there's been some repetitive kinds of threads going through every single one of the presentations. Matt, what you said, we obviously have to do something. And normally at these conferences, if you're like me, and I've seen some of you haven't, and I haven't written your names down, but written lots of notes. I mean, I have like 6 pages of notes here of things I'm going to do. And what typically happens when I go to a conference is I write down the notes and then I put it in a safe place. And then I go back to work and I start returning emails and I start listening to things. And then all of a sudden I forgot, oh yeah, I was going to do some stuff. So I really want to encourage you that this is not the kind of conference that you do that. that there was an incredible amount of information. Want to really encourage all of you to actually take action. And so I have a couple of suggestions. First of all, I know we have some hurdles. I mean, we clearly, the Congresswoman identified some of those. Some of those are financial, but one of our big hurdles is mindset. And when in listening to Dan Dallas talk about how do we change behavior, he's talking about fire behavior has changed, and if they don't adapt, we get more of the same. So to me, it's not necessarily the people in this room, because to some degree, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. You're already doing stuff. But what we need to do is to be leaders to help others do stuff and to get some of these things done. So those changing our values. One of the things that Dan said in his presentation was there will be smoke. Well, if people on the Front Range and in New York City don't think there's going to be smoke when we do our prescribed fires and some of the other treatments, then that might be something that we have to have a conversation about. We're used to it here in Western Colorado. Some people don't like it, but we're used to it. But others are people that we need to convince that this is part of how we're going to handle this problem and tackle it. So mindset's a huge thing. Government moves slowly. I'm an adverb, slowly. One thing I've learned since I've been in office is in fact, one of the county manager put on the board, because I kept going, why can't we do this? Let's do this. And he goes, this is not the Google campus. This is county government. It's not Google. But what I realize is that within the framework of county government, you can actually, move pretty quickly. You can get things done. It's the mindset that you have to get past. Sure, there are statutory guidelines. Sure, there are rules of the road. Sure, there are things you have to follow, but you can still be nimble and get things done. I have a mantra that I think we should question every business practice. Everything that happens at the county, we should question why we do it. Why do we do that? Another hurdle we have is siloing. Every one of you have talked about siloing, that we get into this group think where we are hanging out with people that agree with us. And so we're not ever introducing people that think differently. And that's a huge problem, because then we don't move forward. So we don't get diversity of thought. And when we have diversity of thought, we actually can solve problems in more innovative and creative ways. And that, to me, that's a big problem with some of the ways that we have approached the job in the past. Another is just flat out denial. There's just people that, in fact, I was talking to a gentleman in the back, and 6 years ago, he relates a story to me that 6 years ago, he mentioned to someone in the Forest Service, well, what about the watersheds? And what was the response? That's not our job. And so that's not our job permeates a lot of what we do. And so what we have to realize is it's all our job, right? There's no your job. And I'm guilty of that too. It's like, wait a minute, they're supposed to do that. That comes out of their budget. No, it's our budget. We have to be a participant. So what can we do? I think, and this is an immediate call to action. I started a list of stakeholders, and I tried to not just take the usual suspects. I tried to get unusual suspects for my stakeholder list, people that I wouldn't have thought of. I think Frank said to me in the back room, some of the side there's a meeting here, and then the real meeting happens out in the hallway. You know that, don't you? Or the parking lot. But Frank said, invite the insurance companies to a stakeholder meeting, include them in it. They're the ones that are paying out the nose for these kinds of, property damage and things like that. So my list had 30 people on it, 30 organizations and I tried to think out of the box. So when you put together your group, and I think there should be a meeting immediately where we get together. I talked to Lillian, and where's Jamie, about having a meeting, as soon as we get back. Let's get not all the usual suspects. You have to have some of the usual people, but other people that have different thoughts on how we can solve problems. If I join and belong to one more collaborative, I'm going to spit. I'm so tired of hearing about collaboration that isn't defined by collaboration. And in some cases, I'm more action oriented. So I want to be part of a group that's actually going to get stuff done. So when you think about your stakeholder group, think about the people that actually do stuff. I think it's important to really reach out to other people that move faster than we typically do in local government. So again, think about who's on that. Begin the conversation with people that are unaware and don't understand. And you live in a vacuum, you understand, you're siloed to some degree. You all agree on, the problems are. But a lot of the people that you want to include that may be potential funders or maybe potential, connections may not understand. So a big tip here is stop with the acronyms, right? I mean, I have to have a little dictionary with me and all the time. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? And there's an assumption that we're all on the same page. That's erroneous, right? So if you want to be inclusive, you have to speak the same language that should be common. Begin putting your plan together immediately, right? Because what Frank told me, I'm really like throwing Frank under the bus here. Frank told me that if you have a plan, and we know this for local government, if you have a plan already, if you've already thought it through from all angles, guess what? When the funding comes out, well, first of all, you have a better chance of getting funding. And then when the funding comes out, you are absolutely 100% ready to go. So when people say, well, we don't really have any money, government tends to be so reactionary. We react to the fire. We react to, the congressional funding email just came. I'm like reacting to it as opposed to already thinking about who I want to send that to so they can access funding. Montrose County, get busy on your CWPP. We just sent ours out and we added a whole entire watershed component to it because we wanted to make sure, and even though our watershed, our main source of water falls in a different county, we want to know that information and we want to be ready and nimble. So when we have something that comes up that we can actually have the plan ready to go. So Frank said you're more likely to get funding if you have a plan. So that would be another thing that we can achieve in our collaborative, not non-collaborative, but our action-oriented group. So let's stop calling it collaboration. Every single meeting we have in our community should be collaborative. We shouldn't have to define it as a collaborative, for goodness sakes. Avoid another study. We study studies to study another study, and then we study it again. And then maybe if you're not quite sure, you study it again. And what I figured this out is that this is the way that local government delayed decision-making. Well, you know what? Let's have a study. Well, I think we've studied this. I think we have sufficient science to show what we need to be doing. And so let's not delay the process. NEPA is already a delay process. We already know that's going to take a long time. Let's not add to the pain. So let's see. There's a new sheriff in town. Matt McCombs is the vision, fresh look, a new look. And this whole focus on partnerships and aligning with people that are unconventional. I love that idea. I mean, I never thought I would see Coca-Cola here, right? So who else in our communities can we pull in to solve these problems and to jump over these hurdles? We have once in a blue moon funding. We have once in a blue moon national attention on fires and watershed, and people are talking the language. Let's get after this, folks. I mean, tomorrow is here. If you need help, reach out to Club 20. I've already talked to Lily in Montrose County about getting something together that could work. I just want to challenge you to do something. Just go back and do something that furthers the conversation, that brings people in that weren't a part of the conversation before. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sue. Thank you all so much for attending. Before we get you out of here, I want to take a moment and thank the 2 members of my Club 20 staff who have worked so hard over the last 2 days, Julia and Brittany. Let's give them a big round of applause. The planning team who helped put this event together. I think there's going to be a meeting sometime in the next week or so stay tuned for that. And last but not least, these incredible sponsors that you see on our screen, and most importantly, Swire Coca-Cola as our title sponsor, Montrose Forest Products, all of these other incredible partners of ours. Let's give them a big round of applause. There are grab and go lunches on your way out. There's a vegetarian option and a not so vegetarian option. Thank you for being here. If you want to learn more about Club 20, visit our website. Please travel home safely.